So I have these Boost Oxygens that I got because I saw an ad. I think it was on Instagram or something. And you can tell I sound a lot better, don't I? Dude, the air is so bad outside. The air quality index has it at like 174. I don't even know what that means, just that it's bad. And yesterday when I woke up, I couldn't even talk. Today when I woke up, similar problem, and I'm like, man, this is gonna suck. And I remembered that we have these like sports oxygen things that you just, you take and you go, and no joke, holy crap, I can breathe. This is crazy. I've been
He's
freaking
been
out
on this all morning.
Yeah. All of a sudden, like I can talk better, I can think better. The air really is that bad. I don't think people notice how much bad air like screws them up. We're gonna talk about. We're gonna debate and discuss issues. So I've got a couple of really cool guests with me. Do you want to introduce yourself first?
Sure, I'll introduce myself first. My name is Katherine Brodsky. And I am a writer of sorts, I suppose. And what shall I tell people about myself?
How do you describe yourself politically, I guess?
I guess I describe myself as a liberal politically. Sorry to Tim Pool guests. Audiences.
I think many of them may actually agree with you.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Thank you for agreeing with me. I will send your checks in the mail. I have no money, so I won't.
But you've been making the argument, or you wrote an article, "The Rise of Right-Wing Woke."
I did do that, yes. Yeah. Well, the thing about it is that I had originally started speaking up. I wrote for a lot of very mainstream publications like Variety, Washington Post, Guardian, all that kind of stuff, right? And originally what I was seeing on the left was specifically how there was a lot of kind of silencing culture and what people call woke. But for me, woke is really a type of behavior as opposed to just ideology. And so I was actually pretty critical of I actually don't like calling woke because I think it's very divisive in many ways, but people have been using that word and not the original way, right? Being kind of awakened to injustices. So I started, so I generally don't use that word so much, but the way that word has now been popularized, right? We have been using it in a certain context. So I've found that for me, it's about how it's about people's behavior. And I originally found that on the left, it's sort of the victim mentality, it's attacking people, it's the boycotting, it's the blaming, it's attacks, it's calling people Nazi, all those sort of things. And I've been seeing the same thing now happening on the right. So that's why I wrote about it, because to me, again, it's about behaviors.
I actually agree with you that it is happening on the right, but probably have a different stance on that. So this should be interesting. Thanks for joining us. And then we have Ashley St. Clair.
Hello. I am the token right-wing extremist, minister of right-wing propaganda, here to debate Catherine here.
Right on. Is that how you describe your career then?
No. I'm the author of Elephants Are Not Birds. You can get it at Brave Books.
Well, let's jump into that right away. I suppose, I don't know if you want to respond to what Catherine said about right-wing woke.
I think I would just like to know what your definition of woke is, too.
That's a fair question. So for me, the original definition of woke would have been, right, awakened to injustices, right? And that would have been the original leftist, I guess, definition of woke. And then now, the way that people have been sort of using it is specifically towards the left is more, putting everything in this kind of context of everything isn't just, everything comes down to race, everything comes down to people's sex, gender, all that kind of stuff. And all the injustices in the world are based on that, right? And then people using that as kind of they've sort of weaponized these things against people and use it to sort of silence, to cancel people, to also, it's the cultural kind of currency.
And you mentioned boycotts. Would you lump boycotts into canceling like the woke does?
Depending on how you do it, I think, right? I think people have the right to not support a company or not to purchase something.
Would you consider the Target and Bud Light boycotts woke?
I think to some extent, yes. So I think, for example, Yeah, so I would use the Bud Light, for example, in particular, because it was a specific individual. So I think it's okay for people not to purchase like Bud Light, for example. But because
What do you mean by it was a specific individual though? Because it
Well,
was Dylan Mulvaney?
because it was Dylan Mulvaney, and because the idea was to go after one individual because a company decided to.
You don't think that conservatives would have done it if it was any trans individual, even similar to Dylan?
Well, sure. I mean, even if it wasn't Dylan, I think the idea of going after one person, I don't think
they would have.
You don't?
These brands have had like RuPaul's Drag Race stuff before, and it was Dylan Mulvaney that really sparked this thing.
Yeah.
And I don't think that the issue actually is because Dylan is either, whatever your view is, either as a trans person or like as a Borat style character, as I've described it. I think the issue is more so that Dylan is particularly nails on a chalkboard to the average person. So a lot of beer companies have had drag queens and other pride ads that nobody batted an eye over. I think the issue is that Dylan Mulvaney as an individual is particularly grating and offensive.
Yeah, well, I know that conservatives really don't like Dylan Mulvaney. And look, I can understand some of the issues that people have with Dylan Mulvaney in particular. However, first of all, like if you talk to a lot of people, especially liberals, they don't even know who that is. The only reason I even know who Dylan Mulvaney is because there's this hugely disproportionate level of like attention being paid by conservative sort of pundits to Dylan Mulvaney, and a lot of it is sensationalism.
I mean, as a woman, you don't think that he's particularly offensive? I mean, this is an individual who he really used that just as because he was getting attention and clout from this.
Well, a lot of people
first day
do
being a
things for
woman,
attention
second
and
day
clout.
being a woman, and
Well-
he reduces being a woman to this ridiculous caricature.
Yeah, wearing high heels in the forest.
Yeah, I mean, I think Dylan in general is perhaps a little bit ridiculous. I don't feel offended personally. I do think Dylan is. I did find the girlhood part offensive. I did find the tampon part offensive.
What about the
But that's
bulge
his.
part?
Yeah, that's his whole shtick.
But I actually find the tampon part much more offensive, not from Dylan's point of view, but from the Tampax point of view. That Tampax would endorse someone like that because, well, it doesn't make sense. But I don't think it's necessarily like Dylan's fault in this case to accept this. I think it's the corporations that I would blame in this situation.
My response when you said a disproportionate amount of like right-wing pundits focus on Dylan Mulvaney. Dylan Mulvaney has like 13 million followers.
Yeah.
And is getting big brand sponsorships from Nike. So if liberals, I think what you describe actually is fairly apt. Liberals don't pay attention. So you've got conservatives who are like, hey, something's not right here. And I can't speak to, obviously, if you look at Matt Walsh, for instance, his view is particularly conservative and right-wing, that, his view is Dylan represents trans people and this is bad and this is wrong. That is not my view. My view is that Dylan is creating a Borat-like character that insults women and trans people, is extremely grating to the average person, exemplified by the Bud Light effect, and is doing no favors to trans people or women, and is actually creating fuel for conservatives to, levy their ideological differences with transgender.
Well, I
ideology.
think he's.
Which is it? I don't know.
I know what I just said.
I will clarify. I don't believe that Dylan Mulvaney is trans.
Yeah.
Because trans people who are gender dysphoric don't sing about having giant bulges.
Yes, they're ashamed of it.
So we've had trans guests on the show. We have friends of the show, good friends of the show, people that we care about deeply who are trans, who have explained to us someone who's suffering from gender dysphoria. It's an anxiety. It's dysphoria. Would not make a video to 10 million people singing, "Look at my penis," because that would be the most dysphoria-inducing thing you could do.
I think
Mulvaney
Dylan
did.
is perhaps confused. I cannot speak, I don't know Dylan. I don't know what goes on in Dylan's mind. I think Dylan could have all sorts of issues and confusion. So I don't know.
Oh, I don't know, whatever. Sorry, continue.
So I don't know what is happening to Dylan. And I don't think Dylan is necessarily trying to do harm. I think Dylan is trying to figure out for themselves what is going on.
I think it's inherently harmful for women to pretend to be a woman out of nowhere for a TikTok algorithm, for clout, for followers. Because if you look at the history of Dylan's content, it wasn't this way. He was rewarded by an algorithm and by clout and by a following to pretend to be this ridiculous caricature.
But wouldn't you say
us.
that there is a general issue with people chasing clout in all sorts of arenas?
Absolutely.
This is just another example.
And the social contagion that has now grabbed Dylan is disproportionately harming women.
Yeah, I think so. If you look at, we went over this on the show. If you look at the earliest content from Dylan, it was like Animal Safari.
Yes.
And not getting that much traffic. Then Dylan made, being gay, got a little bit more views. Then made I'm non-binary, it got more views. Then came out as trans, millions of views. And the viewership really, really skyrocketed. What I see with a character like Mulvaney, and the reason why so many people on the right, obviously, I'll say this first. I think conservatives generally oppose gender ideology. They have concerns about exposing their children to people who are trans. They're conservatives, and conservatives have, held traditional values. For a lot of other people, they're just generally annoyed by Mulvaney. What I've heard from regular people, when I go out to like National Harbor in DC and I'm just hanging out and I'm talking with people either at like restaurants or in the harbor or whatever, what I typically hear, and to clarify, I'm talking about like 7 to 10 people. I'm not saying like I went and surveyed the world. Just like hanging out with people who are in the area. They say disgust is typically how they describe their view of this person. I look at it like one of my biggest concerns has been artificial intelligence, algorithms, and how it's manipulating everybody. The rise of wokeness, to go back to that, I believe is specifically because Facebook incentivized keywords. So if you wrote an article that got clicks, Facebook would promote it if it was getting attention, simply put. So people, knowing that rage generates the most attention online, started making more and more content that was rage-inducing. So you start seeing more and more, around 2008, social justice issues skyrocket. It's because these companies are making money. And the best example is Mike.com. When they launched, they were a Ron Paul pro, like libertarian kind of thing. Within a few years, they were quote unquote woke, because that's what was generating traffic and revenue. That's what Dylan Mulvaney is. The earliest content was like animals in Safari. And then you notice that when Dylan starts entering the LGBT stuff, more and more views come in. So I think Dylan is more like Madonna.
So wouldn't you say that the content that's anti-Dylan is the same kind of thing? Because the content that is anti-Dylan does the exact same thing. It induces rage. It does really well on the clicks.
50-50.
Well, because to me, the things that harm women more, or the things that at least you could talk about more, that I think is fair game, that people can have legitimate issues with, is, for example, if we're going to talk about trans issues, is going to be more, children, if we're going to talk about school, not school, sports, prisons, spaces, regardless of what your views are on these things, I think those are at least legitimate topics to discuss. But when you start going on about, to me, like Dylan and things like that, to me, those are decoy topics, and those are rage and clickbait topics.
I don't believe so. I think he is the perfect example of what they're doing to erase women. You saw recently they want to call our female parts bonus holes now.
Why don't you talk about that then very specifically, as opposed to specifically just focusing on Dylan? Because to me, Dylan is a decoy again, and I think it's about rage and clickbait. Because if you put Dylan's name in it, that's what's going to generate the clicks, as opposed to talking about these very specific
Sure, there are going
issues.
to be people who use that because Dylan is popular, sure, but I still think it's a great topic because it's the perfect example of women being turned into this ridiculous caricature and being
It's
erased.
one person who is expressing themselves. I think Dylan is frankly just confused. Yes, Dylan is looking for attention. A lot of people in this world are looking for attention in all sorts of ways.
No, I think that's too kind to what Dylan's doing here, because Dylan is very aware that they're going on and pretending to be a woman and taking away deals and other things from, should I not say that?
Taking deals away from women?
Yeah, taking deals away from women, taking away opportunities from women, and putting himself into our space. He's taking that away.
I agree with you, actually, and I've talked about it quite a bit, that what I refer to as the Bud Light effect is two things. One, the obvious big corporations are clearly getting scared that if they go anywhere near this stuff, they're going to lose money. So Target was like, hey, move that stuff to the back. Yeah. Starbucks claims they never told staffers to take decorations down, but the union saying at a bunch of different stores, they have videos of it. And you can watch the videos of them taking it down saying we were told to. But the Bud Light effect is also that people will start to realize this is how you get viral. This is how you make money. So what'll end up happening is there's going to be some 17-year-old who has 1,000 followers, and they're going to think to themselves, I really wish I had 1 million followers. They're going to go on YouTube, they're going to go on TikTok, and they're going to see people are getting views from criticizing Dylan Mulvaney, and they will start to do the same thing, and they will get views. And not just Mulvaney, though. They'll talk about Bud Light, they'll talk about Target. They'll say, oh yeah, look at me, I'm anti-woke too. And their viewership will skyrocket.
There's a whole industry of being anti-woke. And what I've seen specifically, because in the beginning, when I was seeing some of the stuff going really insane, right? The sort of the woke, what we've been calling sort of wokeness. There were all these people who kind of came out as being anti-woke warriors. But what I've witnessed is people getting really extreme themselves in how their rhetoric and how they attack it. And we've seen sort of the same people who were noticing the aggressive behavior. Like at this point, I've been called a Nazi by by both sides, right?
Yeah.
I want to go on the record and say that I am not a Nazi.
You don't have to. I mean, it's ridiculous. Like,
no, I'm kidding. But that's the thing. These tactics
I would agree that
used.
there's a rise in the people who are using anti-woke warriorness to garner following. Good. Yeah, I think it's good
a great
too.
Thing.
That both are using this to garner following?
I think it's absolutely fantastic.
How is that good?
That people are starting to see that by calling out wokeness, they can receive fame and virality and all that stuff. It's a fantastic thing.
How is that? Okay, this is what drives me kind of crazy, because when I say, okay, you're doing the exact same thing as the people you were criticizing, and they say, well, look, we're just using your tactics against you now. You're getting a taste of your own medicine. And I say, okay, well, so you don't have any principles, basically. And they're saying, well, we'll get principles when we win the war.
What tactics do you think are unprincipled from the anti-woke? Because for the most part, what I see on the anti-woke, I really think the word is overused, and I hate seeing certain people use it. It's overused. But what principles and tactics do you think are...
You treat people as individuals. You treat people fairly. You don't attack people unwarrantedly. You don't call people names. You don't cancel people.
Yeah. Canceling is fairly nebulous. What does that really mean?
Well, people go after people for their livelihood. They attack people.
Who?
So one thing that I would get,
who's getting it?
Well, I've even experienced Mulvaney.
Easy, we were just talking about that.
Well, Mulvaney has only become more and more popular because Mulvaney's also doing red carpets now.
But
at Target, there are people who were for example, there was harassment of employees that was happening. Now, I'll say on the reverse, there were bomb threats that were happening when
real quick though,
the bomb threats were from the left.
No, I know. I'm saying on the reverse.
And the harassment of employees, we don't have proof of that. We just have before there was any big right-wing outrage over Target had experienced what they said was confrontations with staff. That's Target putting out an internal memo. We don't know exactly what that means. It could literally be a woman going, "Why are you doing this?" and then walking away. So to say beyond that, we don't know.
Well, there are videos around too of
people destroying stuff.
Destroying stuff. There are videos of people confronting. I'm not talking about necessarily Target because I haven't seen those necessarily videos, but I've seen other videos.
I do want. You did ask a question. I don't want to miss it when you said why is it a good thing. So I want to say a few things. One, canceling. The initial concept of canceling was an example. There was a NASCAR driver whose father in the 80s said the N-word, so he lost sponsors 40 years later, and that makes no sense. That's cancellation. Sarah Silverman did blackface a long time ago. It was considered edgy, but socially acceptable. 10 years later, she loses a movie role. That's canceling. If someone comes out today, like Dylan Mulvaney, and does something that is offensive to people and that results in a loss of sponsorships, that is not, in my view, what canceling has traditionally been. If a person right now does bad thing and we say, you did bad thing, so we don't want to associate with you, But that's how it's always been. No matter who you are, no matter the idea of cancellation emerged in that we are digging up people's past histories to remove them. That's the difference.
Well, to me, canceling isn't, yes. I mean, I do think there should be, as we say, consequences, right, for poor behavior. But to me, it's not, I think also there's disproportionate effects from somebody saying something that doesn't warrant the effects that they're getting. So people, if somebody lobbies for someone losing their job over saying something, a little joke, or not even doing anything. Sometimes people make things up or start campaigns. There's all these people like on Twitter right now, for example, who start these threads trying to, have people lose their jobs
But I don't really see that from the right.
I see that from the right all the time.
It's definitely...
There's a sense of victimhood. Like this is the other thing that I see is like, and this is something that traditionally was really associated with the left, is the sense of like, we're victims. And this is what I think happens a lot is like, we're victims. And now when we get a little bit of power, we start using this excuse of victimhood to then go after people because we feel like we're entitled to it. And so what I'm seeing now is those very same people who felt like they were victimized, which frankly, in some ways they were, because there was this institutional power that was used against them, right? And at this point, I think conservatives have had things like they were silenced, they were deplatformed, all these things did happen to them. They've lost jobs. So I do want to acknowledge that that is true. But a lot of them feel extremely victimized, and now they feel like there's the excuse because they were victimized to go after other people, and there's this rage that's building, and I feel it's very dangerous.
But so to go back to what I was mentioning before, you said I said it was good, you said why, and so now I'll get to that. People have moral frameworks, and traditionally in the United States, the moral framework has been based on Judeo-Christian values. Very much, this country has been Christian for a very, very long time. People eventually started moving away from organized religion to varying degrees. We're seeing a rise in secularism. However, even with that, many people in this country who describe themselves as secular or liberal, especially staunch atheists, actually still have Judeo-Christian moral frameworks, such as Bill Maher being the best example. Bill Maher believes in free speech. Bill Maher believes in the right of the innocent until proven guilty. These things are actually rooted in the Bible. The simplest example, without going into Bible study, and I am not a Christian, by the way, is the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. If there's but one righteous man, I will not destroy these cities. And it was God talking to Abraham. Lot was in the city, blah, blah, blah. Abraham's like, there's good people there. You can't do this. This is what informed Blackstone when he made his formulation. It is better that 10 guilty persons escape than one innocent person suffer. Ben Franklin went up that to better than 100 guilty persons escape. So those are actually rooted in the teachings of the Bible. You will end up now with secularists who hold those values, not realizing where it comes from. The reason why I think it's a good thing is that the modern left, what we describe as woke, has no moral framework. Their moral framework can be described as postmodernist or fascistic. Fascistic in the sense that they believe there is no truth but power, which is a core ethos of many of the, like, what I would describe as like higher level thinkers among what we would describe as woke. They believe that there is no truth but power is the simplest way to explain their moral framework, which is described academically, say, by the late David Graeber, the anarchist anthropologist who despised being called that. That was a fascistic moral philosophy. That is not something held by the modern, what we would describe as culture war right, who holds more a classical liberal and Judeo-Christian moral frameworks. What ends up happening is you get to these positions where classical conservatives are very classically liberal in a certain sense. They're civil libertarian in a certain sense. Not all of them. Some of them are actually very authoritarian. But you end up with them saying for the longest time, live and let live. We accept that. We disagree with what they do, but they're not doing anything about it. I'll give you an example. In West Virginia, I've been ranting about Berkeley County. 86%, the state is 86% Trump supporting the state. Berkeley County had a drag show in public with children. That's illegal in West Virginia, unquestionably. In fact, it's illegal to cohabitate if you're not married in West Virginia. Not that I think they should enforce that law. The point is, even though this state is the second most Trump-supporting conservative state, they do nothing about the things they think are morally wrong or violate their moral framework. This is because they are complacent and, to a great degree, classically liberal in that, we're going to let you do your thing, we're going to mind our own business. That has led to a rise in a a second country within a country that we've described as a multicultural democracy emerging within a constitutional republic. What happens? The more the multicultural democracy faction, what we would describe as woke, gain political power and use untoward tactics like cancellation, false victimhood, manipulations, lying in the press, etc., the more ground they take from the civil libertarians who reach the point of the pendulum swing, grab the pendulum with full force and say, I now understand we are involved in a cold civil war as described by a Princeton professor, not my words, or we're in a culture war. And you know what? When it comes to war, it's conflict and everyone tries to avoid it. But at a certain point, when someone's smashing through your borders, you decide you have to do something to push back. Abraham Lincoln famously suspended habeas corpus. People called him a tyrant for it. We look back fondly on Abraham Lincoln for all that he did. Conservatives now looking at this are saying we must use culture war tactics lest these people actually destroy our culture. Right. That's why I think it's a good thing that people are starting to say, hey, look, there's opportunity here. We can win. And we're going to win.
Yeah, and maybe I guess I am more of an idealist in that way, but I just don't believe in abandoning certain principles in order to win a war. Because in that case, I'm like, what's the point of being on the winning side if you're going to be exactly the same as the side that you're fighting against?
Right. So do you think Abraham Lincoln was wrong to suspend habeas corpus?
I don't know.
Do you think Abraham Lincoln was wrong to rule by edict? When he started issuing
decrees? Because you're looking back at the winnings and you're saying, okay, this was a better outcome.
I mean, suspending habeas corpus violates the entire spirit of this country.
Yeah.
The spirit of the nation, the rights granted by the founding fathers. Abraham Lincoln outright, he tried, I don't know if this is apocryphal, but if you read history, there's a debate over it, tried to arrest a Supreme Court justice for disagreeing with him. Members of the Maryland legislature were arrested for having Confederate sentiments, despite the fact that Maryland, a slave state, was with the Union. You can't defend those tactics, but we understand in war, we did not want the Confederacy to win.
I understand. And it's sort of what you were also talking about earlier when you were saying, do you let 10 innocent men, go to get, or guilty men go to get the guilty one, right? And my thinking on that has actually changed a bit, especially when you're like looking at, say, the Me Too era. And there was a time where I might have thought a little bit differently about that, but I've also heard stories.
Which way? Agreeing with the formulation or disagreeing with the
well, I think it's better to let the guilty men go, to be honest, because I want to protect the innocent.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And because I've known some people who were innocent who got caught. And it's a tough one. It's a tough one.
It's not. I think it's the easiest thing ever. But wokeness takes the opposing view that it is better that 10 innocent people suffer than one guilty person escape.
Which is why I don't agree with it on either side. And so when I see it happening on both ends, I oppose to it regardless. Because to me, again, I see it as a behavior as opposed to just an ideology.
I don't see the right as going after innocent people.
No, and it's so much more than that. I mean, we're talking about boycotts and how boycotts are woke, but the left has weaponized wokeness and put wokeness into our Department of Justice, they have judicial activists sitting on our courts right now. It's so much more than just, I don't like this idea being pushed on me. I don't like trans people. I don't like this. There's people in jail right now, sitting in jail, having their civil rights violated for just being present on January 6th.
Yeah, and that one is a bit of a hard one for me to talk about. What
principles do you have at that point? What principle? I mean, what is fair in war when you have the FBI colluding with big tech, colluding with Twitter to censor the Hunter Biden laptop story? They worked with big tech. The FBI worked with Twitter to do what they constitutionally could not and censor a story.
Yeah, I mean, I do agree that when we're talking about, censorship and things like that, I think we can all agree that, government getting involved in censorship is never a good idea. When we're talking about, but we are also, for example, for me, I do uphold the values of free speech, which I do think is a liberal value that has in many ways has been abandoned, sadly, by a lot of liberals, not all, but a lot. And, but I also look at something, for example, there was a case recently that Fire took on, and this is on the conservative side. And by the way, there's many examples. Like, I'll call out my side too, right? There's a lot of violations that on the left, but this one is on the right. For example, there was it was a drag show on a university campus. It was a fundraiser. These are adults, and that was the dean of the university canceled it. And so right now there's a lawsuit happening. And so that's like an example, for example, where I do think that's a violation of speech. You might not like the drag show, but these are adults
I also
making
don't
their
have
own
as much of a
decisions.
problem with that because these universities ban Ben Shapiro, who's, he's about as tall as a Happy Meal toy. And they're scared of him.
Well, I don't think they should.
Yes.
At DePaul.
Right,
Yes,
and
at
I don't
DePaul
think
is
they
horrible.
should. I don't think
And
they
nobody's
should
suing
ban.
because no one's suing because they didn't let Ben Shapiro
Well,
there.
FIRE is an organization that I've come across more recently that does seem to do work on both ends, right?
They should.
And uphold, and I think they should.
Yeah.
I mean, that's where I'm like what I believe in is regardless of the spectrum, you should be kind of upholding equal, free
But they're
speech.
not. The issue with wokeness is, like I said, it's infected even our Department of Justice at this point. It's inherently evil, and they don't have the same respect for the other side. That as soon as the right starts playing the same game, it's like, oh, slow down. That's a little too mean.
Well, but
Whereas-
it's a conflict.
Yes,
tactic.
there's no line for the left, though. You're allowed to throw us in jail. You're allowed to destroy our livelihoods.
And I think we need to make distinctions, right? Just like I'll make that distinction on both sides. Like, okay, so there's the radical left, there's the radical right. There are people that I talk to on the right who are, for example, they see what I'm seeing on the right that's happening. There are people on the left who are seeing what I'm seeing.
What do you mean what's happening on the right?
Okay,
though?
well, what I'm seeing is a more aggressive, more sort of like what I'm talking about in terms of an increased sort of wokeness on the right, where there is more aggressiveness, more hostility. There are also calls to violence.
So is aggression?
There is. I mean, I've had death
is
threats from the
aggression
right. I've had death
woke?
threats from the left.
Yeah.
Right. Like that stuff is happening. That's what I think is really important to acknowledge, that stuff is happening across spectrums, and you kind of have to look at the mirror and acknowledge, because otherwise that stuff is going to fester and grow. And I know it's happening in anger. I know it's happening out of a counter reaction, but that doesn't excuse
It
the
wouldn't be-
behavior.
But
Yeah.
let me just say, every prominent right-wing personality condemns calls for violence.
Mm-hmm.
I would say every prominent left-wing personality called for violence against the Covington kids, and many prominent leftists celebrated Andy Ngo being mercilessly beaten in the street. These are the distinctions. When Antifa goes out and firebombs buildings, they get celebrated. When the right goes out and marches down the street, they get called terrorists.
Well, all I'm going to say is that when that happens, it's bad. When people don't call that out on the left, that's wrong. When they celebrate it, it's wrong. But that doesn't make it okay when that happens.
But
right?
no one on the right.
I mean, I'll call it out.
Ben Shapiro's never going to come out and be like, it was a good thing, this bad thing
Ben
happened.
Shapiro won't, but there are definitely people who cheer that out. Like when
But
for example,
like small nobodies
okay,
that no one ever
well-
heard of. I mean, when it came to the Covington kids, you had people who worked at Disney tweeting out wood chippers with blood spraying from it. You had, I think it was Reza Aslan, multimillionaire media personality,
Right.
saying the kid had a punchable face.
I'm not here to defend people doing that.
No,
But you can't play this false equivalence of the people on the right have been doing this thing. Sure, who though? Like small fringe nobodies that no one cares about.
Yeah.
Well, of course, everyone agrees that's bad. And you look at the Derek
It's
show.
not just friend. I mean,
Sure, there are like, look, the issue comes down to there are certainly personalities on the right with followings who will say really nasty things.
Yes.
But the prominent personalities on the right will denounce all of it, and the prominent personalities on the left will support almost all of it. It's an inversion. When you have people who work at Disney, when you have Kathy Griffin, for instance, she loses her job at CNN, because posting that photo of Trump's, severed head. I mean, crazy stuff. But you have very prominent, high-profile leftists cheering on violence. And then you have fringe, moderate, small personalities on the right who may sometimes excuse or call for violence.
And then they use those to paint a whole picture of the right, which is not true at all. But I think it's intellectually dishonest to conflate the tactics of the woke left and this counteroffensive that we're seeing from the right. I don't think they're comparable.
But do you think just because they're not as major, the personalities aren't as famous, that doesn't make it like significant?
No,
the fact that there is quite a few people.
If I saw a dude waving a communist flag out in the middle of the street and then he started threatening people, I'm not going to blame all of the left for the action of the individual.
I'm also not blaming all of the right for the actions of the individual.
But you say I'm seeing it on the right.
Yes.
Despite the fact that the overwhelming majority of like the political movement on the right denounces this every turn, and the political movement on the left cheers for it.
Well, I am seeing a lot of it on the right. I will not say that it's all of the right.
Though? What is it that you're seeing? Calls for violence? Like what?
There are calls for violence. There's calls for civil war. There are calls for separation. There are calls for
on the right and the left.
Yeah, sure.
Like even Sarah Silverman famously made that video where she's like, Civil War, and it's like, hey, don't look at me.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, drink when Tim says it. I'm like, I didn't make these ideas up. I got them from the Princeton professor guy, from the New York Mag and stuff, and even Sarah Silverman's talking about it. But a lot of libertarians are talking about it. I don't think it's a left or right thing.
I do hear. I mean, I certainly have heard many people also on the right denounce that stuff and say that that's not good, and they don't like where some that kind of rhetoric. So it's not. I'm certainly not saying that everyone on the right that's the way that they're thinking. I'm not. But there is enough of a movement towards that I find that alarming. And I wasn't seeing that, and I wasn't seeing that so much. Like maybe even a year and a half ago.
It's not. So I suppose the way I'd look at it is the woke faction, because left and right is fairly vague. Like, what does it even describe? Like, if
somebody said a good way to look at it is more like pro-authoritarianism and
not.
No,
because I've heard it a million times. You've got the true battle is libertarian versus authoritarian. I'm like, that's not true. Like, hang out with some of these people on the right, and they're going to talk about like we should ban this thing at a federal level or whatever it may be. And I've heard people say it's nationalism versus globalism, and I'm like, that's absolutely not it. I think it is. Stephen Marsh, we had on the show. He's a liberal guy. He said there is a multicultural democracy growing with the United States, and it cannot coexist with the constitutional republic. And he said that he was more the multicultural democracy faction. I think that hit the nail on the head with the hammer. You have someone like me, for instance. My politics probably land somewhere in the traditional Democrat, traditional liberal space. But when it comes to issues of fact and morality, I'll be called right-wing for these things, because my views typically align with individuality in the Constitution, whereas the left eschews these values as they come from racist white slave owners. They put out things like the 1619 Project. So left and right, somewhat vague and nebulous, but that's the big conflict that I think is happening.
But I think you're accused of being right-wing when you speak logically and about facts more, because wokeness and the left has become entirely absorbed with rejecting reality.
Oh yeah,
and
reality has a right-wing bias right now.
Yes, there's nothing moral about wokeness. It's their entire goal is to destroy truth.
Like, here's an example. Like, I say Joe Biden is on camera threatening to withhold congressionally approved loan guarantees unless the Ukrainian president fires a prosecutor. That is by definition a quid pro quo he is not legally authorized to engage in, by saying that they call me conservative. Yes. And I'm like, but it's a fact statement.
Because reality is antithetical to wokeness, to the entire left, because if they can destroy reality and truth, then they can destroy the entire notion of good and evil, good and bad as we know it, and create
facts are right-wing.
Yes.
Facts are literally right-wing.
Well, okay. That's okay.
But look, so this is what, like, this is the fascinating thing about the culture war debate. We put out a video clip. We have a reporter on the ground, Elad Eliyahu. He films people marching saying, "We're coming for your children." Timcast News tweets, "Marchers chant, 'We're coming for your children.'" We did not opine on the fact, and we filmed several clips from the march. It was just coverage of the march. All of these corporate press outlets call us a right-wing channel for doing so. It's like it's a smear for simply having done the reporting. We're right-wing.
Wait, was that your video?
That was our video. That's right.
So
our reporter covered that.
So I'm just curious. Was that video, how many people were actually like chanting that?
That looked like,
if you look at it, could be 7 or 8. But we didn't. Elad didn't tweet out, "How dare these people say that?" He said, marchers chant, "We're coming for your children." And it's part of a long thread of a bunch of things they had been saying. We did not condemn or opine in our reporting. We simply showed people a collection of videos of what had happened. Now, I personally opine on it a lot, but they call the clip itself right wing or whatever for simply pointing out a thing happened. And then they lie like insanely about it. But this is the point. I go on the ground and say, hey, thing happened. If that thing offends the sensibilities of the woke, they will call me right wing for having noticed it. This is what left and right means. If you stick to the facts, you're right wing. This was actually
but people pick, but also you pick certain things to cover, and they pick certain things to cover, and those, by choosing one thing over another thing, that also that is a type of narrative too.
But you can't accuse someone of having political values for choosing to cover a story.
Yeah.
Well, you can if you choose to cover one story, not another story.
Well, how they
and not put another thing.
And how they treated
that makes
Tim,
literally no sense.
Why does it not make sense?
So Anderson Cooper is pro-war for covering war. That makes no sense.
No, but if you only cover one side of a story and you don't cover another side of
what's
the
the
story,
side of the story in filming a Pride March?
No, but if you put a particular clip on, right, you say there's all these things happen. It's like this. Okay, when we had the truckers thing in Canada, right, and one thing that the media did is they only put out the pictures of the Nazi flags, right, and then the rest of it was not Nazi flags, right,
and they built
right
all the time.
But that's what I'm saying by only covering. But that's what I'm saying. You build a narrative by only.
But so Elon's thread, for example, if you want to go back to the thread, it showed the entirety of Pride. It showed a lot of different angles of Pride.
And we're called right wing for him covering it in general.
If he covered it in general, that's not.
Those smears, that's wokeness. What they did to Tim and Elon just for covering something, for showing truth, for showing reality, and then smearing him as right wing, smearing him as a Nazi. That's wokeness. That's not, to me, that's not comparable to people not buying Bud Light anymore at all.
I do think it's absolutely fascinating that the left has taken on the identity of supporting child sex changes and children being welcomed to sex shows. And if you oppose that, you're right wing. And I'm like...
But I do want to say that one thing that's happening is like, so one thing is like everyone gets called libtard or whatever, but the truth is like people do still have a multitude of points of views on the left. So it's like what happens is like the people that get amplified are the like more extreme voices. The truth is like if I talk to people like I'm looking at your expression, but like no, because
I agree.
Yeah,
and the left supports them and defends them
and puts them in positions of power.
Yeah,
so the people get amplified, but that's like, the thing, right? Because like I talk to people and their points of views are really diverse in all these topics. One thing that I do find it does make it really difficult sometimes to have conversations, including about say trans issues, is because it does get put up as like a right wing issue, and so because it becomes like sort of a right-wing issue to have any concerns about these things, it does make it like so that a lot of people are kind of scared to talk about it.
But your team did that.
If you're gonna,
I realize.
They did that.
I do. I realize. You know? I'm trying to help the situation. Okay? I'm trying to do my part. Okay.
They made it. Well, that's the wokeness. You're not allowed to.
I get it. I'm trying to do my part by speaking, and I think that's the only thing you can do is like
it is. The dialogue is.
You have to have the dialogue. You have to not be so scared. And I think when people like me and others talk about it, I think it does. Make it so a little bit safer for other people to start talking about it. But I found that when I'm having these conversations with people, because I'm like not this radical, they're like, when we have these conversations, people are much, much, much more sensible about these things. But because the point of view that they're being, like people on the right are being presented with, people on the left are being presented with, they think that everybody's view is just that radical one. And that's all that's being heard. And that creates like a false narrative, a false perception of reality of what people think.
I sort of agree. I mostly disagree. If you have a leadership structure that you support, that espouses certain views, and then you say, but I personally disagree, sure, but you're lending all of your power and support to the views you disagree with, that makes no sense. On the right, you have everyone fighting with each other and arguing all the time.
Yeah.
I can have somebody on this show and I will state my opinions on like progressive taxation, or, argue with libertarians on whether taxation is theft, argue with pro-lifers on, the restrictions on abortion and things like that. Those disagreements happen all the time. On the left, they're either like, I'm too scared to speak, so I'll just let the craziest person have the microphone. Yeah, then you're supporting it. Unless like...
No, I agree. I think that's a huge problem on the left. I think the left needs to have more disagreements. I think they do need to have way more voices represented. I mean, I think there is a huge political issue as well, where you have like really two sides and two candidates every election. In the US, in Canada, it's the same thing essentially. Well, in Canada, you really only have one party pretty much, because the other parties don't have any real power. So it's very like that creates like power structure wise, you really don't have really choices. And so if you don't really agree enough with like one side or the other, like it feels like you have no voice in the political sphere. But like
only if you're pandering to leftists.
Yes. Because
like,
what you just said a couple minutes ago, you said, you don't feel safe talking about certain things with leftists. And there are a couple items like that on the right, but for the most part, there's a lot more dialogue and conversation and diversity of opinion on the right, whereas the left, you just can't say certain things. There's no-go zones.
Yeah,
it's
it didn't
ideological
used to be, and I'll say it didn't used to be
wokeism.
quite as bad as that until maybe, I think it's like maybe 5 years now that it's been like that. I didn't used to feel that way.
But that's the embodiment of wokeism, at least to me.
I think
that's the whole...
That is a problem, and it needs to be changed.
Yeah.
Like, and people need to, and the only way to really change that is through more conversations, more people being like, look, I'm going to take a risk and I'm going to have these conversations that are dangerous. And what I have noticed is like I have chosen to speak, and I've chosen to speak to people of different ideologies. I've chosen to speak to my own groups and speak on sort of dangerous topics. And it's like, honestly, it was scary at first, and then you feel more and more comfortable over time. But it also, other people feel like after you do that, after a while, it feels less so. But also other people then feel more comfortable to be honest around you.
Yeah.
And now I feel like I'll do it in all sorts of spaces. And actually it's like, it's way more fine than people think.
It's a cult. Wokeness is a cult. The left has been dominated by a cult. They have original sin. I'm really fascinated by this. Privilege is original sin. It's and Peter Boghossian talks about this. It's a non-theistic religion. It follows so much of, back in the day when you have this like atheist movement, the complaints many of them had was specifically about the cult-like adherence to certain moral orthodoxies, which now is the left. It explains it. The fear of being an apostate is remarkable. So here's we're talking about this a little bit before the show. I think Timcast is a perfectly centrist show.
Right.
Perfectly centrist in the people we have on, in the opinions of the principal individuals of it. Conservatives would disagree and agree at the same time. They'd probably say, well, you're fairly liberal, Tim, but I see what you're saying. The left would say, absolutely not. You're a right winger, period. End of story. Because to the left, there is no center. You're either on the left or you're a right winger. To the right, you could be on the left, you could be center, you could be apolitical, because there's an honest debate and there's a cult.
Yeah, and I said that I felt like you were kind of a little bit more right-leaning as opposed to
and that's
center.
Because you're either on the left or you're on the right. But to people on the right, it's like I'll sit down with.
But I don't view things like that. So I don't know. I don't think because I'm like categorizing you as like, oh my God, you have to be on this and that. I could see somebody being on the center. So I don't think I'm being that like just unfair.
So
I mean, you might see it that way, which is fine.
We'll talk about the facts. And because we do, we're right wing. End of story. That's the view from the left.
I don't think that's a fair correction.
What do you
but
think
it's literally,
Tim is right wing on?
I think the things that I've seen is like it's probably like a lot of where I was disagreeing is probably the trans conversations.
And where do you think I'm liberal or left on?
I think like abortion, you're
that's not
fairly
trans.
Centrist?
Is it
Having some opinions that are right, some opinions that are left would be centrist. This is my point.
Fine, you got me. You got me there.
But look, so what we see in the culture war is if you deviate from the left in any way, you are automatically right wing, no matter what. You can be a socialist, like Jimmy Dore advocates for hard socialist like medicine and tax policy, and then says something about like vaccine mandates. They call him right wing. You get Steve Bannon is my favorite example. The dude sounds like he's preaching Occupy Wall Street. Steve Bannon says, tax the rich, wealth tax right now. These people are ripping you off. And I'm like, Steve, that's actually economically left of you. And he's like, it's populist, whatever. And he'll say it to every conservative.
It might also be, you know what? It might also be because the guests that you have on, but I will also note that it's probably because also it's harder to get people on who are
In a cult.
in a cult.
And I'm being purposefully derisive in that, but the prominent personalities on the left, you argue they do not represent the left very well, right? Like they hold the extremist views.
Yeah.
There you go. I mean, how do we get on a more moderate? You know what? I got to be completely honest. I would make any bet that if you take, we'll use Emma as an example. Sorry, Emma, but you were just on the show. She did not know Joe Biden on camera said, you're not getting the money unless you fire the prosecutor. She didn't even know that happened. How can we have and she didn't understand moral philosophy either. So how can you have a political debate with someone who doesn't understand basic moral philosophies and doesn't know things are happening in the world? It's impossible. So you'll end up with grifters. A lot of the prominent left personalities hold contradictory or nonsensical positions because it's just the right thing to say. I think Hassan Piker is a really great example in that I literally made a video agreeing with him on Mr. Beast. And then I elaborated that, I said, why are we spending $100 billion in Ukraine when for $100,000 we can cure people's blindness? And he mocked me for saying we shouldn't spend money on foreign intervention. I'm like, I'm agreeing with him. Hassan talks about how the military industrial complex is a bad thing. I literally agree with him, and he mocks me for it. He laughs at me because there's no moral position among these high profile individuals.
Right.
It is literally just, I'm going to say thing that is popular on left.
And if you have a moral position, you're not allowed to be a talking head for the left.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think the problem is more so while I probably disagree with you on your views on Ukraine, that's another one. But I think that, in general, the problem is more so you can disagree or you might not even know something, you might miss something. But the problem more so to me is that taking such a strong position on something where you're not able to be flexible with your views. Because I think the problem is like,
well, there's certain things that I'm just not flexible on at all.
Yeah,
I'm not flexible on trans kids at all.
Okay, and that's
totally not flexible.
I understand that, but I also think that it's okay to sometimes, like for me, I'm okay to change my mind on certain things, or I can hear an argument that's like really compelling on some particular topic, and I'm like, okay, you know what, I've changed my mind. Or maybe there's like a blind spot that I have, like there's some, like, I don't know, you brought up January 6th, and I said, the reason I, like, look, there's some things I just don't know that much about it. There's information that I'm missing, so I don't have like a really strong view, like, okay, I don't think it's an insurrection, but I think it's a riot, whatever. But there's also things that I don't know about it, that you might have compelling information that I just have blind spots. So I don't have a very strong view on things where I don't have complete information.
So why Ukraine then?
Why Ukraine? Because, well, I have like additional background. Like, so I was born there. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. So
I think it's an amazing country. I love it.
Yeah. So, and I mean, I actually have criticisms of Ukraine itself, but like, and I think this is a complex, nuanced situation. I speak Russian, so like I've listened to a lot of like the Russian propaganda inside the country. So I think a lot of the positions for me that are being propagated within the U.S. are kind of incorrect because of what I hear specifically being told to the Russian people or being told by Putin. So there's like a lot there. This is like a whole topic there. I think you could take some positions about intervention that are fair to take. Like you might be like just against, like as an American, you could be like, I just don't think America should be involved. And I think that's fair. Like, I'm not going to say, I think that's fair. Like I do take a little bit of a different position because I think sometimes like you want to take the like
that America should intervene.
Because I think because of the Budapest Memorandum in particular, because America did make a commitment. So that's why I think it does owe a particular allegiance to Ukraine because of that commitment in particular.
But that's not why.
If that wasn't. Mm-hmm. Well, I think there are some reasons that I don't think America is doing it because of their own because they're so good and kind. I think they have their own interests, but those are not necessarily bad interests. I don't think it's because like NATO expansionism is really the reason that Putin went to war with Ukraine or went to get Ukraine. So I don't think that narrative is quite accurate, personally.
Partially, I mean,
it can have I think it
that's
has.
Why he.
I think that's a very small excuse for why he did it.
So why do you think he did it?
Well, I mean, he talks about it. So it's not like I have to guess at it. So there is an imperialistic element to it. I think he wants strategically, like there's areas of Ukraine that he wants.
He wants all of it.
He does express it.
They've made the argument that Ukraine was always Russia and that it never should have, never should have lost it after the fall of the Soviet Union.
He does say that. Yeah.
But the granular view of it is
like, would he settle for it less? Maybe. Like
he'll take everything he can take.
He'll take everything. Yeah,
he wants the Soviet Union back.
Correct.
But U.S. involvement, it's this large geopolitical picture well beyond just Ukraine and its borders, and it goes back. You could reduce the history of the conflict thousands. It all goes back. It's all connected. So the starting point is always going to be further down the road. Someone right now could say Putin invaded because he's a tyrant, and it's like, well, actually, there's this issue. So if we take a look at...
but you can do that with any country.
That's what I'm saying, right? Yeah. So the real issue is that the West has been in conflict with the East. Like, that's really where it comes down to.
Yeah.
My view of it, for the most part, is there seems to be no solution because you get the Soviet era, you get 70 years of the communist expansion, the West opposing it for obvious reasons. There's proxy wars happening all over the place. After the fall of the Soviet Union, the now Russian government takes a certain view over what is theirs and what is right. You mentioned the Budapest Agreement. The U.S. has to come to the aid of Ukraine in the event of conflict. Then you get, I think the largest component of this is less about that, more about energy. I talk about it all the time, the Qatar-Turkey pipeline, the Western powers trying to offset the Gazprom gas monopoly through Ukraine. Hence, you get Hunter Biden and a CIA director on the board of Burisma. The goal is to facilitate the bringing in natural gas and other forms of energy into Europe so that it can reduce costs and allow European expansion, because Europe as a bloc wants to compete and defeat the Chinese economic bloc. The bigger picture in this, I believe, is not so much that Putin is just like taking over land. It's that NATO is expanding for obvious reasons. Russia, we don't care about. We're concerned with China. Russia is perceivably the immediate threat to the West because Russia is our current obstacle in the bigger picture of China. We want Ukraine because we want to control the gas. We want to shut down the Gazprom gas monopoly, hence the frogmen or whoever blew up Nord Stream 2 or whatever. But I bring all this up just to point out, you talk to the average person on the conflict in Eastern Europe, they have no idea.
Yeah.
Literally any of it.
True.
The degree of corruption that the West is engaged in to try and win a conflict is vomitous. And I'll go back to what you said. Sacrificing your principles to win is pointless because then you're just adopting the principles of that you're claiming you don't represent. In the end, this conflict, there is no moral, there is no principles, there's only power. The West will lie, cheat, and steal, and engage in all sorts of evil to gain more power so that they win and that we can have more comfort than the Russians.
But everything is put just on the West. This is what kind of bothers me about it, is just the West, and there's so many people also cheering for Putin, which I find just kind of reprehensible. And I find that Ukraine's kind of own, Ukraine is also making its own decisions, and I think the conversation often takes Ukraine out of it as if the U.S. runs everything, and I don't think that's correct, because if you talk to people in Ukraine, they have their own views on this, right, on this conflict and what they want. And by the way, I don't even necessarily agree that strategically it makes because I don't know if that's going to end up in the best outcome in terms of people's lives. But they have their own view, and they're the ones who are living in this country, and they're the ones whose lives are at stake here. So ultimately, it is their decision to make and decide. And so I think often in the conflict, people talk about it as if it's all U.S. and I also Putin uses a lot of kind of speaking of wokeness, right? He uses a lot of like propaganda in the sense of like, he's fighting for anti-wokeness and blah blah, which is complete bullshit. I mean, and in particular, like Russia has zero threat of wokeness and within the country. These are not people who are. Neither does Ukraine, by the way. Like neither Ukraine or
Ukraine's got a Nazi problem.
Yeah.
So does Russia. So does.
But I mean, Zelensky was just meeting with Greta Thunberg.
And see, this is the narrative too that kind of pisses me off, because yes, Ukraine has some Nazis. So does Russia has a lot, frankly, more Nazis. But people are like, well, we send money to Ukraine, we don't send money to Russia. Okay, fair enough. But both countries have their own like issues with this stuff, right?
It's a complicated.
But it's not like we're not talking about like Nazis walking around all the time. Like there's stuff, but it's like, but it gets so. It's fun to talk about for people, but that's not the main issues.
My last thought on this is just because it is a bit esoteric and dry to talk about war and stuff, but isn't it fascinating the left has become the pro-war faction?
Yes.
But but that's not fair to characterize it as pro-war. And then the right, and then people are like, no, we are anti-war. This is not, you can't say this is how it's positioned. This is what bothers me. Okay. Because first of all, I'm not pro-war, for example, right? I don't want war.
Hold on. Do you support the U.S. in offering supplies to the Ukrainians to engage in war and conflict?
Yes.
Yeah, that's pro-war.
No, it's not. And let me.
I mean, come on.
Can I explain?
Not sophistry.
No. Can I explain why?
Sure. You're going to say that we're trying to stop a war, so we're financing war to stop war. It's like
no,
nonsense.
Because what happens if you don't provide these weapons of defense for
Russia
Ukrainians?
would have walked in. There would have been very minimal death. They would have taken the Donbass and Crimea, and that's the end of it.
Well, just Donbass and Crimea, really?
Yeah.
No.
That's where the conflict is happening. I mean, look, you can.
Even you said that
Putin wants more.
Yes.
Yeah. So
how do you negotiate? Because if the ultimate goal to stop war is negotiation, right? How can Ukraine negotiate with Putin in good faith with any kind of position of power if they have no power to fight back?
The argument that because someone else would engage in war, we must engage in war, but I oppose war you're pro-war.
No. That makes no sense.
Do you support being involved in the war? That's what pro-war means, right? I'm not saying that you want war to happen all over the place.
That's called you're saying let's not give people a chance to defend themselves against a much larger country with way more resources.
We are not Ukraine. They can defend themselves all they want, and it's none of our business.
But again, we just went back to the Budapest Memorandum, right?
Yep.
The U.S. is U.S. not
I don't
keeping
support
its word?
I am anti-war, even in terms of the U.S.
So you believe that the U.S.
agreement.
should not keep their word?
Yes.
Yes.
Interesting.
A generation cannot
So nobody
offer
should
up,
ever. So nobody should
Who said
ever.
nobody
No,
ever?
because
But I will tell you, the best. Sean Fitzgerald mentioned this. Ron Paul's statement last week. A generation cannot promise the sons of the future generation. You do not get to go and say, trust us, the next wave of people in this country will die for you. No way. No, I'm not interested. And for what? Russia's economy is relatively small. What we're really looking for is making incremental gains for the European Union. We are not the European Union, and I do not agree with U.S. imperialist expansion to be a unipolar dominant force.
So in Germany, it would have been okay too if people were like just to die like during the Holocaust and stuff like that too, right?
There's a bigger question. So you want to invade China right now?
Do I want to invade because of the
Uyghur Muslims?
Yeah.
Right. There's a big question about the expansion of like a rogue state, or like what the Nazis were doing, and even the Soviet Union. Very, very difficult questions. So I'm not like an absolutist in terms of there can never be war. I'm saying In most circumstances, I believe war should be the last option no matter what.
Yeah.
And I believe that Biden and the West wanted war, and they fanned the flames of it to give it a casus belli for removing Putin and eventually occupying and shutting down Russia.
See, Biden gets blamed, but Putin doesn't get blamed. It's interesting. The guy who actually did the invasion.
What do you mean he doesn't get blamed? I'm not
understanding.
What do you mean?
Well, Biden is the guy who apparently
faultless. I'm saying the Western intelligence agencies are sitting there thinking, how do we remove Vladimir Putin? We have no cause. We have no justification for an incursion to remove this guy. We need a casus belli. So you do things to force or to create the tensions or to exacerbate and then finance the war, creating a justification now for actually going into Russia. Now they can remove Putin or get Putin removed. They can destabilize the nation.
How are they going to? Okay, so the idea of removing Putin, even there's no successor to Putin. So what would the
What do you mean no
plan
success
be?
rate?
Successor. There's no successor to Putin.
Right. They want to destroy it.
To what? To do what?
What do you mean? To get rid of the command structure of Russia.
So there'd be no president of Russia?
Someone will gain control, like oligarchs or something will happen, or the West will find someone more favorable.
What's the evidence of that, though?
The evidence of specifically
that's what the U.S. wants.
That the U.S. wants to remove Russia?
Yeah.
They've outright said it publicly, like Hillary Clinton has said. Who was it? Joe Biden said we want to remove Vladimir Putin? Like, they've publicly declared their intention to do so. My point is this. If you think the U.S. should be sending arms to a foreign country that is not the U.S., you support war. I don't understand why it's so hard to just be like, yes, I'm absolutely in favor of this.
I support defense. It's not the same thing. I don't think I think that's a false equivalency.
Then we'll call it, you support this war.
I support a country being able to defend itself.
To engage in active conflict,
in an act of defense.
Right. So, okay, let's break down.
The United
let's break
States
it down.
has to fund it.
What does it mean to be pro-war? Let's not even bother with whatever you think that might mean. I will just say it plainly. You support sending weapons to Ukraine.
I do.
There we go. To libertarians and to anti-interventionists, that is pro-war. Because our view,
I disagree with that framing, but you can see
right,
people can reframe it however they want, but I disagree with that.
My view
framing.
is pro-war means to actively engage in this kind of conflict. I believe the solution is negotiation. I do believe that if Donald Trump is elected,
you can't just do. You can't. Well, Donald Trump believes that he can too.
We're talking about sending billions.
Yeah, because what Donald Trump will do, he'll pressure Ukraine, and he'll say, and Putin will just take whatever areas he wants, and Ukraine will have zero power to negotiate.
Will the fighting stop?
Not my problem.
Will the fighting stop?
Sure.
So you support a circumstance in which more people fight and die, and I support a circumstance in which less people fight and die.
But
pro-war versus anti-war.
But you're basically, hey, Russia can go in and take whatever they want.
It's a bit of a straw man explanation.
Not really.
My solution
That's
is the one
accurate.
that results in the least amount of death. And if you've got active conflict going on,
but you're also saying at any point anybody can go in and take whatever they want.
That's a bit absolutist. I didn't say that.
Well.
There's an active conflict between Russia and Ukraine right now,
okay,
and the solution is the least amount of people dying. So
less people can go and die, but you're taking away the autonomy of a country.
Yeah, I oppose war. I would seek to end the war by any means.
So you don't mind
you are in
if
favor
Russia,
of war.
So you don't mind if a country, if
I don't
Russia
mind.
came
Come on,
in,
these are not the arguments we're making.
Okay, so
it's obviously bad that Putin did this. How do we stop the fighting, the bloodshed?
Okay, so
that means Ukraine and Russia will each lose something.
It would be preferable to you, for example, if there was a war between, say, a conflict between Russia and the U.S. and wherever you live right now, came in. And Russia, to stop the fighting, Russia took wherever you live right now. That would be preferable.
You are saying that I, as an individual, seeing my own land invaded.
Yes.
Okay, that is not the same thing as the U.S. Sending armaments 5,000 miles to engage in a conflict with a nation we're not at war with.
Okay.
Big difference.
Okay.
If Russia invaded U.S. soil, I'd call for a draft. I'd say it is the duty of every American to defend our land from a foreign invasion. You have to protect your territory. Ukraine absolutely.
But you just said that this is about lives. You'd rather see less lives lost in Ukraine right?
Yeah.
So that you are pro-war in this
The
situation,
US
but you're against war in the other situation. So
the U.S. is not Ukraine. Do you understand? Do you understand the U.S. is not Ukraine? They're two different countries.
Yes, I do understand.
That Ukraine is 5,000 some odd miles from us.
Right.
We don't live there. We don't own that.
So why do you? But you made the argument that
if
that
someone
Ukraine was
attacked
about
my
lies.
home,
Yes.
I will defend it, as people should. I would not expect Japan to defend the United States in the event. We may have allies who come to our aid. That's a bigger picture. I would actually disagree. I'd say that's not that's a different conflict.
Okay, sure. No, I understand that distinction.
The solution
However,
here,
but you still said previously that it is about lives lost, right?
Mm-hmm. Partially.
So I don't quite. Okay, so partially.
I mean, yeah, like you're making a bunch of absolute statements and straw man arguments.
I don't think they're straw men.
The simple picture is we are not Ukraine. We have no business with Ukraine.
Yeah, which is those are separate arguments.
And the solution to this problem of the war is to be like, let's stop it now before it goes nuclear. Because I believe Putin will use nukes. He will not give up power.
Okay, so but that's a different argument.
Let's end the war.
Yeah. So if you're worried about nukes and you're worried about escalation because you're worried about nukes and consequences to you or the U.S., fine, that's a different argument. You can make that argument. That's a different argument, though.
Why are we at war in Sudan?
I don't know.
Your position would mandate the U.S. be involved in every war on the planet.
No, because if they, for me,
just the weird one thing that for some reason you agree with.
No, because
only if they're ideologically left.
Because of the Budapest Memorandum.
Should we be at war in Syria?
No.
Why though? I don't understand.
But Budapest Memorandum, if that didn't exist, I would say you have the right to your claim.
So it's not about supporting people.
Otherwise, I would say, listen, because
obligation.
of my own personal feelings, I'm like, I would rather the U.S. be supporting Ukraine, but I would take your argument that the U.S. shouldn't be involved because, you don't want to be involved in any wars and around conflicts around the world, and that's fine. I would be completely fine with that argument. Okay. And in general, I'm not super keen on the U.S. being involved in operations around the world.
Well, I'll wrap this up. Otherwise, we just go in circles. But my point was simply that the left is in favor of a foreign intervention right now. Mm-hmm. The right is opposed to it, which is interesting because 20 years ago was the inversion. It was the right in this country saying we got to do the right thing, and the left being like, no war.
Yeah.
Although to be fair, that was all lies because Obama was like, I'm going to end the war, and then he gets in, he's like, we're sending more troops.
Yes.
But let's do this. We're talking about Nazis, and I have this tweet, which I think is up for it's a really great conversation. This is from Tower Gang Cole. He tweeted, excuse me, who would you rather have babysit your children, Nazis or transgenders? With 28,251 votes, people voted 93.7% for Nazis to babysit their children. 6.3 voted for transgender. Wow. I say wow because I would have voted for transgender. I would have not voted for Nazi, but there is a big discussion about this.
I think I would have said, why are there only Nazi and transgender babysitter?
But it's obviously, someone might say I'd rather have neither or whatever, but given these two options.
Do you think that many people actually would prefer Nazis, or they're trying to make the results of the poll more radical?
I mean, of course, the poll was meant to be radical and edgy. However, I think that to me showed something. And I was quite pissed off, actually, at this poll. Because to me, it's like, okay, we know Nazis are bad, right? Transgender, because obviously it was tying it in with this kind of idea that transgenders are somehow dangerous to children, and whereas there isn't really that.
But I don't know that this is a good reflection, because people will use this and say, look how crazy the right is. They'd rather have Nazis watch their children than trans people. But one, I think people are probably answering that poll disingenuously. And two, the definition of Nazi is anything that's slightly right-wing now. So
that could be it. I mean, if the presumption on the people who are taking the poll is that Nazi just means right-winger, because the left attacks
it does according to the left.
I mean, yeah, I'm sure some people might have, but I think overall, I do think it meant Nazi in the sense of Nazi. Obviously, it was meant to be edgy, funny kind of poll. I'm sure it wasn't that serious.
What would you vote for?
But transgender.
There's an interesting conversation around this in that, think about it for 2 seconds. Let's take the stereotypical depiction of a Nazi and a stereotypical depiction of a trans person. And perhaps that's how people perceive it. A person who is a Nazi, you might not know they're a Nazi. In fact, I'm sure most people who voted in this poll, who have kids and have babysitters, don't know their babysitter has horrible political views. Never came up. So there's a question around, you might go to a coffee shop and buy a bagel from a Nazi and not even know it. However, when it comes to someone who's trans, they're typically discernibly transgender, meaning that a child being babysat by a Nazi, the family might not even know. The person who is trans, the family will know. So there's an interesting there. Me personally, I don't think there is an issue. Like, I'd be more concerned about a Nazi slipping in political things because they have an ideological bent, as opposed to a trans person just being trans. I don't know, So, but there's an argument there too. The average person in the trans movement is going to hold gender ideology values. And the question is, we can't assume in the debate either of them would do anything untoward to your children.
Yes.
In which case, it simply becomes a guy with the sides of his head shaved and slicked to the side wearing a suit, and a male or female who is discernibly taking and modifying their body in some way. I think that's why people chose Nazi.
I think it's also people just would rather have a more entertaining outcome on that poll.
For sure.
So I think
more
there's
entertaining outcome.
Things like this are going to be used to say, oh my God, look, all conservatives would rather have Nazis watch their children because they think all transgender people.
Hold on, Tower Gang is not a conservative.
But do you know who probably found that?
I did.
Conservatives.
But why would you make that assumption?
They're probably
we don't know
trolling. That. I would be interested to see the quote tweets on that.
I think maybe
I
disagree.
it.
It was the left that retweeted it and chose Nazis.
Well,
ironically, we don't know. We don't know. And the Tower Gang guys aren't staunch conservatives.
I don't think that 93% of these 28,000 people would actually choose Nazis. I just don't. I don't.
It was at 95 when I first found this, and I don't know. It pissed me off to be honest. Just the fact that question was even asked. It did trigger me. I will say. I will admit to that.
But that's the goal of it, right?
Yeah,
because they do this as bait to say, look, they think that all trans people are a danger to children, and that's what they use it as fodder.
But a lot of people do say that trans people are dangerous to children.
Would you rather have a trans person or a Nazi babysit your kids?
Obviously, I'd rather have a trans person babysit my child, and I would. I'd choose a Blair White.
Yeah, Blair's fantastic. I was thinking about, I would absolutely choose one of my friends.
Yeah.
Over
but again, definition of Nazi. You're considered
a
Nazi. I'm considered a Nazi. You said you were called a Nazi.
Apparently, I have. Yeah.
What does that even mean anymore?
I was called a Nazi, by the way, for challenging Project Veritas. Like.
Yeah,
everyone at this table has been called a Nazi.
It means bad guy.
I think this is the other thing with trans people. Like, what happens a lot of times too is like, the people that get kind of elevated, right? So you'll have certain people. Again, you'll get like the really crazy people. Elevated, right? And then you have a lot of like really normal trans people who have very like moderate views, and they don't get showcased at all. So when people talk about trans people, they think
Dylan
they're
Mulvaney.
just this is my
point.
Just Dylan Mulvaney. No, I agree.
That's why,
and that's actually more damaging. I would say that's the more damaging thing, I guess, about somebody like Dylan Mulvaney than it is about Dylan Mulvaney being a Bud Light. This
is probably why people chose Nazi, because they're not imagining Blair White, they're imagining Dylan Mulvaney, and they're like, I do not want whatever that is around my kids. Hiking heels in the forest and singing about having a bulge. If let's think about it this way.
I'm sorry. I still can't get over that.
This is the act, and this is the damage of Dylan Mulvaney and the left's knee-jerk defense of this polarizing and offensive individual. I'm willing to bet with the Bud Light stuff, when people think of trans person, they think of the worst examples like Supermam. Remember Supermam?
Yes.
6 foot tall male
it's
smashing things in a store because a nervous 20-something-year-old guy had no idea what was going on. They see things like that in Dylan Mulvaney. So the question is, who would you rather have babysit your children? They imagine a guy wearing a polo shirt. And they're like, what's he talking about? What's he doing? He's just a guy in a polo shirt?
But people need to also do better about not amplifying these, and that is something that is done, on purpose by certain entities. And yeah, I agree it shouldn't be defended, but also it is intentionally amplified because it is rage bait.
But here's a point I wanted to make.
Yeah.
When, as you pointed out, when everyone's a Nazi, the left argues, you have a video of Richard Spencer getting punched in DC. It's a guy wearing a suit and someone punches him and they say, that's what Nazis look like. Mm-hmm. If the image people call up in their mind of Nazi is a guy wearing a suit and transgender is Dylan Mulvaney singing about having a bulge, I'm not surprised people chose Nazi. That's the fault of the left for engaging in that narrative.
It's also the fault of the right, though, for magnifying
reality.
A Dylan Mulvaney all
the
the time.
right didn't magnify it. TikTok and the left did.
No.
10
Dylan
million
had
plus
10 million.
followers.
Yes,
No.
10 million followers.
Okay,
Dylan
but
had.
it's both because
Before that,
Dylan
Richard
Mulvaney,
Spencer had like 60,000 followers.
but all anybody talks about on the right is also Dylan Mulvaney. They don't amplify. Like I found so many interesting trans people, including
Blair White's pretty popular on the right.
Yeah, which they do magnify. But there's also all sorts of other kind
you're
of more
not
left-leaning.
If you're trans
people.
and you're on the left, you are not allowed to be amplified if you hold more centrist positions.
But why,
you're just not.
Okay, but
they
why
don't
are
amplify?
But why are the right?
They go
not
out of their way
amplifying?
to hide
Hold on.
detransitioners.
Wait.
The right does amplify Blair White.
They do amplify
Yes.
Blair White, but only Blair White. Like I don't see
Because
other.
Blair White agrees with their opinions on politics.
Correct.
But I thought you said they were amplifying Dylan Mulvaney.
No, they're also amplifying Dylan Mulvaney.
More so than Blair.
Why doesn't the
more
left?
hold on, but there's also I have, for example, I found a few other people who are trans who are not right leaning necessarily, but have like very moderate views, more left leaning, kind of moderate. And I've actually posted some things by those people, and and I've had people mostly positive reactions, right? But those people are generally not amplified. And you're right, they get kind of attacked a little more.
Because
ContraPoints is a good
not,
example.
and they're not allowed to. The left goes out of their way to silence detransitioners who speak out too.
But
there's one view, and it's
They don't have to be I mean that's true. What you're saying is true. But
ContraPoints is a very prominent YouTube channel and
Yeah.
was attacked over and over and over again for ever deviating from the cult. Mm-hmm. Like I've invited ContraPoints on the show multiple times in the past few years, and it'll never happen because it's a cult. So when I've criticized Dylan Mulvaney, I've pointed out that ContraPoints has excellent YouTube videos, really well put together with thoughtful arguments, history, and I disagree, but intelligent. Blair White makes videos, makes arguments. I agree more so, and they're well put together. These are two rational individuals producing content and making arguments who happen to be trans. They represent the left and the right of trans people, I think, just in general, and Dylan Mulvaney is a character intentionally mocking and deriding, but defended to an absurd degree by the left.
But again, these are the only individuals. Like, there's such a variety of people.
Because they're the most
here's
egregious
my point.
examples.
ContraPoints, I think the controversy was that ContraPoints said something like, of course, there's a binary, you can't transition. I'm paraphrasing, but I think ContraPoints is making the point that traditionally trans people were, wanting to be male to female, female to male. And now you have a younger generation that says it's trans if you just feel like you're water gender or whatever.
Yeah.
Contra got attacked for that, backed off, and just goes silent.
Yeah.
Dylan Mulvaney gets defended every step of the way. Mm-hmm. Why silence the rational person having a legitimate argument?
Yeah.
That's the left doing that.
Sure.
So the right is correct to criticize Dylan Mulvaney. I don't see conservatives going out of the way to repeatedly attack and slam ContraPoints. In fact, many people on the right are like, oh yeah, Contra makes good videos. I disagree. I think it's, wrong. But Dylan Mulvaney is particularly offensive. The left should be in agreement. This is a caricature of women and trans people that is damaging.
And it's not just Dylan personally, because Dylan wasn't getting that much hate on TikTok. It was when the left and corporations started slapping Dylan on everything they could and putting their stamp of approval and saying, yes, this represents the trans movement, this ridiculous caricature. So it wasn't just people were like, oh my goodness, I can't believe this Dylan Mulvaney person exists. It was when he was slapped with the seal of approval from the left as their poster child.
Well, a lot of this stuff, I think, is just very driven by commercialism. I don't know why specifically Dylan became as commercial as Dylan did.
Because Dylan has a young audience, and that's what those poor marketing gals at Bud Light wanted a younger audience.
But I can tell you.
Yes.
Because we pulled up Dylan Mulvaney's TikTok, and what do you find? Dylan is like so many other creators who found a marketable path to fame and fortune. When Dylan gets surgery, it is not because Dylan is trans. It's for the same reason Madonna gets surgery. To be in the press, to be in the media, and to make money off of it. Hence, singing about having a penis, despite trans people being dysphoric with these things. Dylan's earliest content is being on a safari, animal stuff, hugging llamas and stuff. Didn't really get the traffic. Dylan comes out as gay, a little bit more views. Comes out as non-binary, more views. Comes out as trans, explosion.
And
into the millions.
then the whole series.
And then created a series. So what happened is Dylan Mulvaney is like, I want to be famous, dancing on The Price is Right. Have you seen that video?
I have, yeah.
Spinning on the ground and stuff. And for 3 minutes, clearly just trying to be famous and having some strange, need for attention.
But that's also probably part of Dylan's personality, is that extreme too.
And what happens is a person this desperate for attention is basically brute forcing TikTok, trying a bunch of different strategies towards fame, hits one, succeeds, and then attacks it full force. TikTok then promotes Dylan Mulvaney, who gets 10 million followers, and then corporations are like, that's what's popular. No,
yes.
That's what TikTok is promoting, not what's popular, but they don't care. If it gets eyeballs and it's cost effective, they go for it, to the detriment of the actual trans community. But the left, because they're tribalists who need to simply disagree with whatever it is the right says, defends Dylan Mulvaney instead of actually having principles.
Yeah, I mean, I think...
And I'm right wing for pointing that out.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of times where people are confused as to what is like... I think there is a tendency
Why
to
are
like,
they
wanna
confused,
be nice.
though? People didn't used to be this confused. Why are they confused?
Well, because I think there's a lot of reasons. I think some people genuinely believe this stuff. I think some people go along with it because they're trying not to get, offend anybody. I think some people just like think they're like being nice.
But why are they confused? Why are there are more queer youth than ever before, and we have queer youth rising at an astronomical rate. Why are people confused?
Plastic.
Yes.
They're turning the freaking frogs gay. I think
according to RFK, it's the water.
No, I don't disagree. I think conservatives miss this one. We bring it up quite a bit. Endocrine disruptors, ice cream.
Oh,
ad nauseam.
absolutely. I mean, men's sperm count has dropped 50% in the past few decades.
Yep. I think we're polluting ourselves.
And AJ Cortez, he talked about it too. A lot of the fertility issues with between couples are from men. Yeah, because they have lower weak sperm.
Yep. I think, I hear this climate change stuff and they're like, we got to get rid of plastics and, and clean pollution. I'm like, yes.
Yes.
You want to make an argument about whether climate change is real or not. I wonder why Obama's buying beachfront property and why these investors in Miami Beach are like, it's flooding, but we're gonna buy a 35-year investment. I don't care about your argument on the planet getting hotter. I care about the fact that we're dumping garbage into our own food supply. And I think a lot of this, the rise in queer identities and gender dysphoria particularly, is because of endocrine disruptors.
I think that's
I'm not gonna go there myself, but I will say that pollution is generally a bad thing. So I'll agree on the pollution is bad.
You're familiar with phthalates and PCBs and all that stuff?
I not really. So I won't.
Plastics.
I won't like.
Plastic leaches into our food. Unfortunately, even liquid death. We were bummed to find out because they say death to plastic, but those cans are lined with plastic. PCBs and phthalates are two examples we often cite that leach into our food and disrupt the human endocrine system. So conservatives will point out, the rise in gender dysphoria among youth must be a social thing. And I'm like, yeah, to a certain degree, I think so. Social media for sure. But I think, don't discredit the fact that plastics are a relatively new phenomenon to humans. You go to an antique store in the 60s, everything was metal and glass. And then we started switching it out for plastics, which were cheaper and easier to produce. And now we've got chemicals leaching into our food, which are messing up our brains.
You can compare it with Europe or something.
Have you seen Dark Waters?
But they do a lot of plastics too,
Dark Waters?
Do they have the same?
It's a really good movie with Mark Ruffalo, but it goes into the scandal with the Teflon. And yes, you should watch that. Very good movie. But I think there's a lot of these things that are impacting us more than more than we know, but I don't think that there's more gender dysphoria because of the plastic, so to say. Maybe people are more, men especially, are more effeminate because of it. I think that plays a role, and we should be a little more loose on gender identity in a way. You know, you're not a girl because you're a tomboy.
People are more comfortable being, but also maybe part of it is socially, like people are more comfortable expressing themselves in different ways. Like
but that doesn't mean you're trans. Yeah. So
that is
social.
There's. I think a lot of it is social. I mean, that's not necessarily means that you're like different gender, but like you are able to express yourself in different ways.
I think it's hitting us in the face. It was Alex Jones who said like 10 years ago that atrazine was turning the frickin' frogs gay. It's a hyperbolic approach to it, but atrazine, there was a study. It's been I believe it's been retracted or updated to argue against. But simply put, we know that there are chemicals in the city water supplies and in our foods that disrupt the endocrine system.
And in the air.
Okay, I won't debate you on this stuff because I
talk about some
I don't talk about things that I don't know anything about.
The Try Guys, the famous video where the BuzzFeed guys got their testosterone levels checked, and these 20-something-year-old dudes had testosterone equivalent to 80-year-old men.
Yes.
That is clearly related to the rise in gender dysphoria.
I had a friend who had to be given, born a boy, had to be given testosterone to go through puberty.
Wow.
Because
now imagine this.
He had too much estrogen.
Imagine there are many men who are increasingly becoming effeminate, having lower testosterone, lower sperm counts. They're going to have a mentality and a personal experience more effeminate, and it's a spectrum.
Is there has this been measured that there is lower testosterone in it?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah,
men's sperm count. We're gonna have no sperm at this rate.
Yep.
But men's sperm count has dropped 50% in the past few decades.
Really?
But I mean, in general, I always thought it was interesting. If you look at men today, they look smaller and thinner than ever before. And the Try Guys from BuzzFeed, I think, was a really good example. 4 guys got their testosterone checked, and it was equivalent to 80-year-old men. Now, this could be attributed to eating less meat, eating less fat, and working out less. That results in a lower
And soy
testosterone.
does increase estrogen.
Also, the
It
diet
has phytoestrogen. It literally has phytoestrogen in it. However, that argument from the conservatives is 100% wrong on the soy boy thing.
I don't think it's going to make you, it's not going to give you boobs.
No, I shouldn't.
North American diet, that's pretty terrible, like compared to, say, like the food in North, it's a very processed diet and all that stuff probably plays a huge role.
I want to clarify the soy thing though. Not 100% wrong, but phytoestrogens are weaker than typical human estrogen. So if you block your estrogen receptors with phytoestrogen, it actually inhibits what estrogen
Oh, that's
would do.
interesting. I didn't know that.
However, flooding your system with phytoestrogen could make up for it being weaker.
Yes.
So definitely it can cause issues in that.
Are we seeing any kind of reversal considering, like, the food pyramid scam, right? Like, and a lot of people have been more interested in their diet and kind of reversing things. Like, are we seeing any kind of differences where people are like taking better care of, like, consuming more fats, more?
Well, ask someone who's doing keto or carnivore, and they all swear by it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, when you look at the people who are on like keto diets, they tend to be in shape, like
It
fit.
works.
Yeah.
It works.
I think it does work for a lot of people.
I lost 30 pounds when I cut out the sugar.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
sugar,
30
like,
pounds.
sugar, processed meats, like too many carbs, like that kind of stuff, like seems, and even like just the type of food that people are consuming here is just, because I have friends who come here from Europe and they say like they feel sick. And I always feel way better when I'm like in Europe.
It gives you anxiety too, having a kid, because you're like, everything. I'm like, this isn't plastic, this is frozen, this has preservatives. It's anxiety inducing to go grocery shopping nowadays because you don't know what the hell anything is anymore.
The left and the right unifying, over eating healthy and getting in shape. And
Yeah. I mean, I started paying attention to
they're
that
not unifying. No, they're putting morbidly obese people on the covers of magazines.
Yeah, we may be agreeing with it, but
is,
they're like,
it
yeah,
is the
true.
only,
I will
they
agree.
promote food addiction, and that is the only drug, food addiction. It's the only addiction where they do not highlight the physical manifestation of the addiction. Instead, they glorify it.
It
right?
is
You
a
say-
weird thing.
With drugs, you say, don't do meth, not
Yeah.
even once, and it's got all these scary photos. But with obesity, they don't say that. They don't highlight food addiction, and it's a very real addiction. And I feel I know a lot of people who have an addiction to food, and we don't want to help them. The
look,
left glorifies them. They throw them on Cosmopolitan, saying, and they're directly responsible.
Look, I don't believe in shaming people.
COVID
I don't believe in shaming people for, because I don't know why they are the way they are. Maybe they have other issues that.
But what do you consider shaming? Telling them that they're probably going to die?
No. I believe in honesty. I don't believe in promoting like obesity. I don't believe in like, hey, you're beautiful because you're like have all these roles and stuff. But like, right? No, but like, no. I do think it's gone like insane over the top. But sometimes you don't know why somebody is like the way they are, and just because somebody's like, some people are plus size and healthy because they do exercise, they have a healthy diet. Like I think you have to focus on that as opposed to just like appearance.
Yeah, but during COVID, they weren't even telling.
No,
they were hiding the fact that obesity was yes.
Oh, I think
a
lot of it was insane.
Yes.
Yeah.
I had a black market gym in New York.
Wow.
Seriously, it was like underground. It was like a speakeasy gym because they weren't. Police would come all the time.
Yeah, back to blue, huh?
Yeah.
The cops coming in and shutting down gyms. Mm-hmm. That's crazy. They filled the skate park in Venice with sand.
Yep.
What? There's like
I didn't realize like in Montreal like you couldn't go outside, like there were all these curfews. I didn't know that
New York
it was
like that, wasn't it?
But it wasn't just them doing that. That was sinister in itself. But what was really sinister was them not telling people that obesity is a serious comorbidity factor for COVID.
Sure.
They killed people. They had people killed because they refused. They didn't want to offend.
Right? Like, come on. Like, we know obesity is bad for you.
Sure.
Now, I'll make a libertarian argument, and I tell people, if you're fat and you want to be fat and you eat a lot of food, hey, man, do your thing. I beg of you to be healthier, though, because I want you to live longer. And I will stress, I lost 30 pounds starting a year ago when I cut out all the sugars. I have been super thin in my life. I was 200 pounds even a year and a half ago. You don't realize how bad you feel until you drop the weight, and then you feel like you have lightning surging through you. So like, I really recommend people get healthy. But the left, we have, I go to the mall and I see ads for women's clothing, and it's morbidly obese models.
Yeah.
Calvin Klein puts 2 morbidly obese people in their underwear ad. The joke we made before is that Unilever owns Ben & Jerry's and Dove. Makes sense, right? If you're a large corporation that owns a women's beauty products, but you also sell ice cream, you don't want to convince women to stop eating your ice cream. So what do? You tell them they're beautiful for being fat. Then you sell them ice cream and soap.
I mean, I don't know about that though. I think
true.
people don't.
I'm not saying they're doing it intentionally, but they
don't teach self-discipline. I'm not fat and I eat Ben & Jerry's.
Well, their idea was...
I shouldn't have told the conservatives. I'm sorry. I'm kidding. Only Jeremy's chocolate.
Only Jeremy's chocolate.
Their idea is that, okay, like they want to reflect, I guess, the kindness aspect of it is like they want to reflect that people can see themselves even in whatever size they are, but there is a dishonesty in the sense
they're going to see themselves in a morgue or in a hospital bed. Genuinely, I don't think that's kind.
Well, you want to be. What I'd rather see is like aspiration, right? Like you still have to be honest. Like I want to like. I've never been like really big, but like I want to be. If I see somebody who looks really fit, right? Like I want to be like this. I want to be realistic with myself, right? Like.
But the kids growing up, they might not have that same opinion of people who are fit because they weren't the ones put on magazines. They might say, "Oh, I want to be bigger. I want to do," which is unkind.
I think you're giving too much benefit of the doubt to the left on this one. Mm-hmm. I view them as inherently lazy and entitled, and
some of them
prideful and gluttonous and envious and wrathful and et cetera, greedy.
I mean, it changed because the modeling standards or the acting standards used to be very like, because I worked in that industry, like it's like, you had to be tiny, you had to be so, and then it just went like completely the opposite direction.
When the left
that's your job though. When you're modeling, what other job do you have as a model? To just stand there?
But there's a difference between like the traditional liberal and leftists. And so with leftists taking over,
I see.
You now get to this point. I will say this too. I genuinely believe the left represents the 7 deadly sins, unquestionably, in every way.
I think it's, yes.
I mean,
and
pride events are literally, like pride parades are name one of the 7 deadly sins, you hit the nail on the head with the hammer. In Berkeley County, at the Martinsburg Pride event, you had overt socialists. It's a pride event, and people were waving socialist flags, communist flags, leftist stuff. You've got, for one, they declare the pride. You have absolute laziness, which I attribute to socialism. People who think, I love this. The idea is that when communism takes over, there'll be slam poets or something. No, you'll be working in a field if you're not put up against the wall. But they don't want to work. They're envious. They're greedy. They're lazy. They're angry. They're prideful. All of it exemplified in one event.
Yeah, but I think I do want to circle back on their motives, especially as it relates to obesity and food, because what many of these people won't realize is they're being manipulated. Because if obesity is okay, then you're not going to look at why are we getting heavier? I mean, the average person weighs 30 pounds more than they used to in America.
It's greed.
Yes, because the FDA, these big corporations, they're very greedy. They don't want people to wake up to the fact and say, why am I so much heavier than all of my grandparents, all of my family were 50 years ago?
When is Dow Chemical going to pay for the Bhopal disaster?
Exactly. That's what it's about.
These big companies don't want to lose money.
They don't want to be held responsible.
They offer lucrative jobs to government officials. Once you're out of the FDA, you'll come and work here, and vice versa. And they get their people from their companies appointed to make money. So ain't nobody going to come out and condemn Splenda. Granted, aspartame just got hit recently.
Yes.
But this is the issue. It's all of these things, and the left just defends them on tribal grounds, I guess. It's the weirdest thing to defend the government mandating private corporations get no bid, no liability contracts, but that's what they did. It's just all of the 7. That's my point. 7 deadly sins. There you go.
That's the weird part for me is the defense of corporations. Because growing up, like that, the left was actually the ones criticizing corporations, right? Like, I don't know if you've seen the movie, the documentary, The Corporation, for example.
I haven't seen it, but yes, they used to.
That was actually had like a bit of an effect on me, like that documentary. And I think they came out with something like a follow up to that recently as well. And so for me, I was like always looking at corporations in a really suspicious way, and corporations, they're sort of, I look at them as sort of psychopaths, right? And that was sort of the thesis of that documentary. And now corporations are sort of seen as these beacons of like arbiters of ethics and morals, and they have a say in society. Like they are the arbiters of of righteousness. And I find that really suspicious, and I find that strange that more people aren't too suspicious of them. Instead, they embrace them as part of society, as like almost like a human being, a politician. And I think that's
they have more power than our politicians.
Pfizer tattoos?
They do.
Liberals
are getting a Pfizer tattoo?
Really?
There's tons of videos of people getting Pfizer, Moderna, and Johnson.
No,
you didn't
really?
see? Let me pull something up.
That's amazing.
I mean, I'm not doubting you, but wow,
this timeline gets better and better.
I mean, and look, and I'm not like anti-pharmaceutical because
I'm okay with them getting Pfizer tattoos.
For my
if they want to
life
brand themselves
quality,
as an idiot for life, like permanently, that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't get a tattoo. I'm not like pharma is completely evil. Sometimes they are, but
imagine you start seeing a guy, then you find out he has a Pfizer tattoo.
There were look, here you go. Here's one. Dallas Fire Rescue Medical Director uses tattoos to spark conversations around COVID or whatever. So you had a bunch of people getting, look at a J&J tattoo.
Oh,
that wasn't even a good
COVID-19
They got the recalled
Pfizer.
one.
The recalled tattoo is really, really something.
Yep.
That was kind of cute. The one with the face, the blue one with the little.
This?
the one.
This one.
Yeah, that one's kind of cute.
What does it say? Phase 3. And look, the getting your vaccine card tattooed.
I mean, I guess that's effective time.
The J&J tattoo right there.
They might as
Johnson
well
and
just put it on their
Johnson.
forehead. I'm mentally ill.
You know, but I don't think it's mental illness.
That is, you don't think you have to be
It's
mentally ill?
compliance.
You don't
It's
think being
compliance.
mentally
No.
ill is a prerequisite to tattooing your COVID vaccination card
That
on
is
your arm?
not mental illness.
It saves time.
That's absolutely mental
You know,
illness.
every time you have to pull it out of your
literally, factually,
wallet.
and academically not mentally ill.
I think,
Like you're
can
you're
guarantee
speaking.
you these people have some sort of mental illness.
Maybe they
The
have
fact
a sense of
that
humor.
human beings throughout history have adhered to authority indicates it is not mental illness for people to blindly follow leaders and things like that. The reality is it is more damning to tell you that these people are not as what we would define as mentally ill. This is what people do.
It's standard.
This is Samantha.
It's standard.
behavior.
The people who marched behind the famous photo of all the people saluting Hitler and the one guy crossing his arms.
He might have even crossed his arms not out of defiance, like for all we know. He just made it, but he felt like it just...
To argue that every single human who has ever followed an authoritarian regime is mentally ill is just wrong.
No, but I'm not calling anyone who got the vaccine or adhered to that mentally ill. I'm saying if you tattoo Johnson & Johnson on your arm,
right, but you're
probably a little kooky.
But you're saying this as an insult. I'm saying it as a fact. Like,
oh.
I think it's important to understand if someone actually has a mental illness that results in them following the leader. And I don't think so. I think humans, like we would not define someone as being mentally ill because they adhere to authority.
Yeah, I have to say that I learned a lot through the pandemic that I didn't realize about compliance, even about my own compliance, right? Like, I think especially in the beginning, there's a lot that people are like, okay, out of fear and out of following just the human dynamic. There's even all these videos, right, where people just like will be in a medical office and then somebody will just stand up and other people will stand up and everybody stands up and they don't even know why they're doing it. Yeah.
It was a study they did where they had people come into an office for an appointment, and when the person walks in, there's a beep every minute.
Yes.
And then when it goes off, a person stands up and then sits down. Then they have a couple people come in and sit down, and the mark has no idea what's going on, notices them. The new people who come in, also, the beep goes off, they stand up, then they sit down. Eventually, this person started doing it too. Mm-hmm. Me, I wouldn't do it. I would just ask, I'd be like, why is everyone standing? I would literally go, what are you standing for? Like, what's happening? And if they didn't have an answer, I'd just be like, I'm not involved in that, but people literally do this stuff.
A lot of people do. And I think also it's important to recognize in oneself, like a lot of, like, even if you think you won't do it, a lot of people, they might think they won't do it, but are capable under certain situation of doing these things. And if you don't kind of watch yourself carefully, I think it's important to know that anybody's kind of capable and under the right circumstances. Like,
arrest, fear for your life.
And smart.
You would land at LaGuardia during COVID, and National Guard would be there.
Yeah, I mean, I did certain things in the beginning
for your COVID papers.
Yeah, I mean, I did certain things during the pandemic that I later had rethought, but like. I mean, it's. I think it's important to know that, and then I watch other things that people did. Like certain things, I think for me, the limits tend to be very moral, like ethical, and that's where I wake up. But certain things, like I might go along with that are where the morality doesn't kick in, where I'm like, okay, there were arrows or things like that where
I defied all the arrows.
Yeah.
You're talking about like in supermarkets?
Yeah, like in supermarkets, right? There's all these people, right? So there's all these people who might walk, right? And a lot of people did, right? And it has no logic. So for me, I often will be like, this makes no logical sense, and then I'll like, why would I do this, right? But sometimes you don't think these things through and you do it on autopilot. So it's important to be like really aware all the time.
There's a couple things I would say. Apt navigation may require certain behaviors you disagree with. So, I want to go into a Home Depot, I had to wear a mask.
Yeah.
Am I going to sit there and scream and yell at people, or am I going to walk in, grab my stuff and get out? I'm going to avoid the confrontation. To be honest, most of the time in West Virginia, you didn't need a mask. Like nobody cared. And so I have a picture of me. I took a T-shirt and tied it with a shoelace on my face because we went to Home Depot. I walked in, was shopping, and they said, you got to put on a mask or leave. And I was like, oh, I'm getting this stuff and leaving. And they're like, no. And then I'm like, I don't have time for this and I don't care. So I wrapped a shirt around my face and then they stopped talking to me. I'm like, and some people may disagree. Say, no, you should stand your ground and all that stuff. And I'm like, yeah, I don't think it is a lapse of morality to sometimes comply for the sake of efficiency.
Yeah.
But there is a line, and we all have a different one. That is, some people outright got into screaming matches with people over wearing masks. And I'm like, I don't know how effective that is towards winning.
I don't think it's useful. So this is where I kind of look at things. I'm like, would me getting in a confrontation with like some clerk at a store change anything? No. Well,
it's going to ruin someone's day and yours.
Exactly. But what can I do to change that outcome? Is it
don't
maybe
shop there.
Maybe, or maybe writing. Well, there was no, like, for example, where I was, it was a law, right? There was nowhere to shop.
It was never a law, to clarify.
Where I was
No.
No, but I'm in Canada, so it was.
Oh,
it
in
was,
Canada.
Yeah.
Never mind. You're
Yeah.
correct. I thought you were going to say. I thought you were in New York.
No. So it was law. I didn't know.
I was wrong.
Yeah.
Yes, it was law.
Yeah, it was law. So there was no choice. But what can I do that would be more effective? Well, writing, to politicians and campaigning and, doing things like that has more potential effect than me like getting into a confrontation with a clerk that can't do anything.
Right.
So I comply. I mean, at the beginning, I didn't know better, right? Honestly, with masks, like I did not know better. I wore the flimsy masks. I freely admit this. I did.
We had masks.
Yeah. I still think at a certain point I thought definitely the N95s at the very least I think do something if you wear them properly fitted, but whatever, I won't get into this. But I do think that but in general with rules and things like that, if you disagree with them, like does it make a difference to try and argue with some poor schmuck at a thing?
No, but more people should have protest.
But protesting could. Yeah, protesting could in that situation. Writing to your politicians, campaigning.
You know what they're going to do with that letter?
No, actually, no. I worked in an
You gotta send a lot of
office at some point. If you get a lot of them, if it's organized, they take, even at one letter, they take it as like, because when I worked at an office, they actually said like they consider even one letter to be the equivalent of like 100. So they do care about it.
Maybe.
They do postcard dumps and stuff. There was in West Virginia, there was a cafe, and we prefer small businesses. I prefer avoiding chains when possible. So there's a big shopping area, and they've got a cafe, and there's also a Starbucks across the street. And we said, of course, we shop local. And we walked up, and they had a big thing on the door saying masks mandated in West Virginia. So I said, Starbucks it is. Starbucks had no mask mandate. Walked right into Starbucks, nobody wearing masks, not a care in the world. And I'm like, that's how you do it. If Starbucks says no mask mandate, Starbucks gets my money. If the local business, I walked up and I was like, oh, masks, I'm not coming in. And we turn around and walk out.
So it wasn't like fully mandated by the government in the US?
In West Virginia, there was a mask mandate, no one followed.
Okay.
So that's the thing, the power of culture. The government comes out and they're like, everyone's got to do this. And everyone started laughing about it. And they were like, oh, yeah. Come on, it's not going to fly. No one in West Virginia, like what you mentioned about, do you really want to get into it with a clerk? These are likely bigger chains, or you have these small businesses in New York that are terrified that a cop's going to walk in at any moment. And there was even a restaurant in New York that had their door open and they got fined because the cops, these people are evil. In West Virginia, the people who own the businesses are more worried about you leaving than a cop showing up. So if you walk in with no mask, they're going to be like, please just buy something. Like, I'm not worried about a cop showing up. And those cops, they also know that because of that cultural shift, no cop wants to be the guy to go into a store and find them because they're going to know who you are. And you're not going to have a good time going like, that's the thing about rural living versus urban living. When you live in a big city and you have 50,000 cops who don't care about you and will mercilessly beat you if they're commanded to, people are terrified of them. But if you're in Jefferson County and your sheriff's department has a couple dozen officers, everyone knows by name. They know that if they do something wrong, they're not going to be able to buy a bagel tomorrow because the bagel shop's going to be like, what were you doing? I saw you out there harassing that kid. Come on, man. And they know it's a lot harder in a smaller community. That's why I think cities are awful, by the way. You got to get out of the cities before it's too late. Where are you still in Canada now?
Yes.
Commie Canada?
Well, socialists, it's different.
Man, I feel bad for you guys.
Are you pro-socialism?
The funny thing is, so I started out being a more hardcore because I'm an immigrant, right? I think a lot of immigrants tend to be a little more capitalist leaning. So I was like more capitalist, and I would tell people I'm libertarian because I studied in a very left-leaning department, studied communications, and so to trigger them, I would tell them that I was more conservative than I was, and I would tell them I was a libertarian, but actually I wasn't. But I was more libertarian back then. I became over time, and there's that adage of, right, if you have no heart, if you're not like
if you're not liberal when you're
Winston
young, you have no
Churchill,
heart, and if you're not conservative when you're older,
Right.
you have no head.
So the weird thing is, maybe
That's a nonsense statement,
Yeah,
by the way.
it is a nonsense statement. But if you were to believe that, I'm losing my head now, because I've grown a little more pro socialism over time, because I still believe in capitalism, but and I definitely have a lot of views on that. But like at the same time, I do now. I'm not libertarian, and I have some maybe libertarian beliefs on some things like drugs and stuff, but I do think that some elements of socialism I do believe in, like healthcare, for example.
I want to amend that famous quote.
Yeah,
and I'll put it this way: if you're a leftist, you are stupid and evil.
Oh my God!
Yes,
Did not see that one coming. Gee,
Clarify.
wow.
And that
See,
says,
I find that okay. So I find that so not useful, because leftists will say like really horrible things about the right wing, and I don't think
I didn't
that's
say anything about the
helping
right in
them.
that. I didn't say the right was good.
Yeah, but I don't
And I
like.
said leftist, not liberal.
No, but I just don't like. I understand, but I just.
If
don't,
you're a fascist, you're stupid and evil.
okay, I just.
The blade cuts both ways.
I just find that whenever you state anything like that, it just breaks conversations down. That's why, like,
I think
some people are like, I won't talk to you if you have a pronoun in your bio. Well, I'm just like,
but this is an inevitability, I suppose.
But I talk to people with pronouns in their bios. I talk to, like, the reason I do is because I think you don't know where anybody's coming from. You don't know where they're going to go. And if you have free conversations, even not, I told you before we started,
right.
I'll even talk to.
But you're describing a problem on the left, not on the right. I will talk with anybody. Like, we'll invite a hardcore communist on this show to talk. They don't do the same. They're the cult that rejects conversation. Look, I've invited people on the show who have insulted me, and numerous occasions. I think I did. The problem is on their side, not on my side.
Yeah.
So, it's going to be what it is, and I think it's fair to say that if you're a leftist, you're stupid and evil. Of course, it's a bit hyperbolic, but I'll clarify in a more academic way.
Okay.
If you hold hard leftist values, you are ignorant of history, the facts, and probably a combination of the two, you are maliciously evil in that you seek to cause harm for personal gain.
They want to destroy humanity. They're inherently anti-human.
I don't think it's so absolute to say they're anti-human.
Oh, absolutely.
I don't think they think that they want to destroy
They want
humanity.
less people.
But
they think you and I are not
right.
worthy
But
enough.
that's why I say it's not so absolute. They
Yeah.
obviously want some humans to exist to serve them and
Yes.
and abide by their lusts and demands. But it is an inherently destructive philosophy and ideology. So if you look throughout history, any extremist element, an authoritarian element, has been a net negative on humanity and extremely destructive. I am not making any excuses for fascists. They are also stupid and evil. If you hold fascist values and beliefs, you are a combination of ignorant of history or maliciously evil. Right now, Nazis have no real political swing anywhere in the United States or in Europe. But the left holds tremendous, and I don't mean liberals, I mean the left holds tremendous institutional power. They're losing it, as we've seen with Bud Light and stuff like that. But these are people who are a combination of ignorant and evil. You like the idea that, first, let's talk about ignorant. Decentralized systems are faster and more efficient than hard centralized command economies. Period. End of story. You can look throughout history and see it in every capacity. Additionally, in terms of survivability, the hardcore decentralization also, like left libertarian ideologies, also don't work. You need to have a balance. There needs to be a degree of hierarchy and a degree of decentralized decision making, which is why I think America is so brilliant. The executive branch for certain issues, the legislative and judicial branch for other issues is masterfully done and is probably the best we could have done so far. We can probably improve upon it, though.
Yeah.
Right now, what we've seen from the left is the combination of left libertarians, all right in my book for the most part, not so evil, just kind of ignorant. I like left libertarianism to a great degree. Very, very ineffective and can't scale. So what you end up with is, in the modern culture war, authoritarian leftism or various degrees of authoritarian, which literally just can't and doesn't work. It results in conflict, fighting, fear, suffering, etc. The same is true for ultra-traditionalist authoritarianism, for sure. The adherence towards like hard cultural values by force.
So how can we empower more of the libertarianism that you do like?
I think we're winning. And I think we're doing exactly that. If you look at Bud Light and Target, this corporate adherence is failing. If you look at where things are starting to trend towards, there's an ebb and flow. There's a pendulum swing. Leftists gained a lot of power. It caused a massive backlash. Now people are pushing back, and we're seeing, with more and more disaffected liberals pushing back against this. With 9 million Obama supporters voting for Trump, you're seeing an inversion, and a pushback in the direction. I don't think you'll ever have a perfect system. You'll just have a constant back and forth. So long as we adhere to intelligent values and true virtues, we'll resist the worst evils of history in the world. Granted,
I think a lot of it has to do with the media too. I think the media, especially since it's run by the left, is one of the most sinister things that they've done, because they've completely bastardized our consciousness and what it means to be human and the things that we care about. So I think dismantling that and empowering more people to have discussions like Tim does here and like other independent journalists are doing is one of the most important steps in healing whatever the hell is going on here and dismantling the left.
The challenge is that for a lot of humans, that's why I was saying it's not a mental illness to get a tattoo. Many people don't pay attention, don't care, and just want to say whatever they have to say to survive. Humans are social beings. So if they believe popular culture mandates X, they will engage in X for the sake of survival. We need to shift the narrative on what is required of people to be good citizens. Conservatives gave that fight up a long time ago. They're starting to push back. You've got to have the big ask. I am not a Christian. I think it's good that Christians are winning certain fights because it creates a middle ground.
Yes.
So you've indicated that you see yourself more as a centrist, and I'm kind of identify as a liberal, but a lot of people have sort of told me, well, you got to pick a side, right? And the thing is, like, politically, so this is kind of my question here. Politically, there's always this kind of thing where you got two sides, right? And I don't vote in the U.S., but like if I was forced to vote in the U.S., you've got like conservatives or Republicans rather, and then you've got the Democrats. And for somebody who doesn't necessarily identify with either, because like one really doesn't quite represent a lot of the things that, I feel. And then the other one I also feel like is kind of gone a little, doesn't represent either in the values department, let's say, and how they operate. What do people who are kind of trapped between the two, what choice do they really have?
Well, you do have a choice. First, there are other political parties taking the defeatist approach of like, well, but they're not going to win. Well, you vote for your principles, and no one ever said you deserved to win. If everybody voted on principle, maybe you would, but too many people are scared. I think the true liberal and centrist approach would be and libertarian, a vote for Donald Trump, because he is your greatest opportunity towards firing the bureaucracy. DeSantis won't do it. He might. I'm not super concerned. I'm not super trustful that he would. Joe Biden is the bureaucracy. So my view is this. We have a primary system. The primary has a lot of different people of various backgrounds. I mean, Ron Paul ran for president as a Republican, but we know he's very libertarian. It is not that you have two choices. It is not true to say there's only two parties. Who do I vote for? If you think that, that means you're only paying attention at the very last minute. If you were there from the beginning of the race, you would know that at the local level and in the primary level, you have an opportunity to vote for people who are more aligned with you ideologically. And people say the two-party system is broken. I completely disagree. You got Bernie Sanders, and you got the problem is the privatization of the two parties. That for sure. But varying ideologies exist. The Democratic Socialists are gaining a tremendous amount of ground in the Democratic Party. I just think the sane thing to do for anybody who truly pays attention is to vote for Donald Trump, not because he's a savior, not because he's a hero, not because he's a good guy, but because the one thing that this country really, really needs is for career bureaucrats in DC to be fired from their jobs because they're unelected. The people who are actually facilitating the filing of paperwork, who are writing the bills, who are basically running the system, have not been elected and have been in government for decades. They must be fired. We need term limits on government employees. For that reason alone, our best opportunity moving forward is to get Donald Trump in so he can fire a ton of people, and that's it. He's got one term left. He fires everybody. We need sunset clauses on laws. We need term limits for government employees, and then things will dramatically start to improve. Outside of that, Vivek Ramaswamy. You know what would solve the problem in this country overnight? I believe and I'll say this as in a preliminary sort of sense that needs review and an honest academic assessment. In order to vote, you must sign up for the Selective Service. You do not have to sign up for the Selective Service. It is optional. That will solve this country's problems, in my opinion, within the matter of a few election cycles.
And then would you do away with the draft?
No, that is the draft. Here's how it works. You want to vote in this country? Sign up for the draft.
You agree with the draft?
I don't agree with the federal government sending people to Vietnam in the draft. I do agree that if this country were to be invaded, it should not even be required there be a draft. If someone broke into my house, I will protect my house. If a roving band of gang members were attacking my neighbors, I would do whatever I could to help my neighbors within
then
reason.
You shouldn't need the draft. I'm actually.
That's my point. It should be
voluntary. No.
It should be that for among American citizens, we all agree the draft. The problem with the draft and why I have opposed it and why most people do is because we sent people overseas to Vietnam. Why? Because we are scared the Viet Cong and the communists were spreading into... Get out of here. I don't care about that.
But if you were a country fighting for noble causes, you might not need a draft necessarily because people would want to fight for their country. So I think that...
Right. If the United States was being invaded, most people would probably agree we need to stand up and defend ourselves. It's not a choice at that point.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm actually against the draft because I think it's immoral to force somebody to fight, to kill.
I would actually agree with you.
If... I disagree. I think... That view exists only in a liberalized society that hasn't actually had to deal with conflict. But I assure you, if someone broke into your house and had a knife and was threatening your children...
No, but you could because voluntarily, probably, like if that was the case, I would fight, right?
That's my point.
Yeah. So but I'm saying that's why I wouldn't have a draft, though. I don't think it's fair to force someone to do that, but it doesn't mean that other people won't choose to voluntarily do it or that I wouldn't choose to.
I understand. I agree.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be mandated. It should be unthinkable not to.
Yes.
Correct.
However, my point is this.
Yeah.
If right now we said, in order to vote, you have to sign up. We're resetting Selective Service. Everyone, it is optional, men and women, optional to sign up. If you want to vote, you must sign up. That's all you have to do. That's the bare minimum. You know what would happen in this country? Uninformed, ignorant, and lazy people would be like, no way I'm signing up for that. Mm-hmm. And well-informed, impassioned people who would defend this country would be like, I absolutely would fight for this country. I'll sign up for that. It is an optional thing to do. You don't have to, but you don't get to vote unless you do. If you won't swear a pledge to defend this country, why should I allow you
but
to
only
have say?
Defend the country if it's invaded, yeah?
That's the problem with the draft, admittedly, that people in power will weaponize it for war and gain and stuff.
Yeah.
But I think this right now, again, I'm saying it requires assessment.
There's too many people voting. There's too many stupid people voting.
And so how do you solve it? Well, you still have the option to vote. But what if we said this? Right now, people are complaining that only men have to sign up for the Selective Service. And a lot of men complain they have to in the first place. It is like, hey, I oppose the draft. It's like, okay. Well, how about we say this? You have no duty to this country, but you can't vote. How's that choice? I think that's fair. You have no obligation to die for this nation, but you also don't get the privilege of choosing how the nation is run. Then the only people who will be voting are the people who could fight in the first place.
And is that, would you say that's only for federal elections or even local elections?
Everything.
Like
what
if
about
I wanted to vote
people?
For city council, I would
elderly
have to enter
people
the
have to sign up
Selective
for
Service.
it. You can serve this nation during wartime without fighting. There are things that anyone can do no matter how old you are.
So in order to vote for city council or my local,
you have to sign
I would
up.
have to sign up to serve federally to protect the country.
Signing up for Selective Service is being called. There's a bunch of different branches. Theoretically, you could be National Guard.
Yeah, but
it could
that
be
would
Coast
be for
Guard,
the
whatever.
nation as opposed to
Don't
local
care.
municipalities.
Absolutely.
No, I don't.
Here's what
agree
happens.
With that.
People who sign up for Selective Service are the ones who would have to go to war. Guess which direction they would be likely to vote in. The people who don't go to war are voting for war. The people who aren't serving, Democrats, are supporting war in Ukraine, likely getting us involved in a foreign entanglement which may have no end. Hey, if you are unwilling to fight that war, don't vote for it. Let's take away. So here's what we do.
What if I just want a bridge built in my town? I have to now be in the Selective Service? Absolutely
You
not.
think you have a right to take the money from people in this country without putting up anything in return?
No, that's not
You
what
want to
I'm
build
saying.
a bridge that costs money. Where's that money coming from?
Me,
Taxes.
you, taxpayers, but
Right.
absolutely not.
So
I'm
if
not.
you want to say...
So I would have to fight in a war to get a bridge.
Technically, you would have to fight in a war. Like, how often would you be voting for war? You would vote
I don't
to go to
know.
war?
I feel like you could have
So,
a lot less
listen,
issues if you just remove the D's and the R's.
This is what you're misunderstanding. If the only people who can vote are those who are the ones eligible to fight, they're not going to vote for war.
Yeah, that would
you're
be
less
effective
likely.
at stopping war and
Making sure that only those with
anti-interventionists.
skin in the game are the ones who are overseeing how
I
we
don't
actually
think you
run the show.
need to go to war to have skin in the game. I think mothers in this country have a lot of skin in the game, raising the entire next generation.
Well, then that's ultimately the point. That's why I'm saying this is a simple approach.
But
There's got to
taxpayers
be
have skin in
some.
the
You
game.
want
some-
mothers to have to sign up for that? I mean, I'm probably not
the
voting
draft could
anyways,
involve
but-
cooking food.
Yeah.
So the misconception people have is that when you're drafted, like you're on the front line with a gun. It's like, bro, you could be fixing refrigerators. You could literally running a daycare. It's
Do I
like
look
you're.
like I'm gonna fix refrigerators?
Are you gonna run a daycare?
Absolutely.
You gonna take care of kids?
Oh,
You
I
wouldn't.
don't-
You wouldn't take care of people's
I don't
kids
know about that one, Tim.
who are like building a bridge.
I don't know. It depends.
take
Are
care
you a
of someone's
Nazi or a
kids.
transgender?
So yes, one of the roles in a time of conflict could be watching kids. The assumption that like a lot of people who got drafted cooked food, and many of them didn't even go overseas. Some of them like filed paperwork. The idea
Yeah.
that you refuse to serve your country but demand the right to dictate what that country do is insane to me. Like, you've got to have some skin in the game. You can't just be like, I live here, therefore I can tell
I would
everyone else what
agree
to
with
do.
that more if it was for federal elections. But
All of them.
if I want to vote in a local election, I don't think I should need to
mean-
serve the state.
Yeah, I mean, like
You want to
tax
dictate what the
paying-
state does without providing anything
No,
to
no, no.
it.
But you are
I
paying
mean,
taxes.
serve
You are
the state,
providing
capital
something
S.
to the
Yeah,
state.
there's questions around that. I just think it isn't. That's why I said it requires academic review to assess how you actually navigate this. But I'll put it simply: it is a greater detriment that we allow people with contempt for the system to vote in it.
Yeah.
I would
agree
if
with
given the
that.
choice between leftists who hate America voting for its destruction and you have to have some skin in the game and a commitment to vote in the system, we're better off with those who are willing to say, yeah, I'll work for the community. You know, I'm willing to do that.
I will say there's a lot of people who hate America lately, like both on the left and I will say also on the right, which is like for different reasons. I will though for different reasons, but like I've just noticed that as someone who does not hate America.
Yeah.
It's just
But you're Canadian, right?
I am. I lived in New York also though,
Oh, okay.
so I've spent a lot of time in the U.S. and I've just like
Canadian who loves America.
I do like.
How do you feel about Trudeau?
Thanks.
Well, you're right wing.
You know what? Yeah, this will make me a little right wing.
Little. You're a Nazi now.
I'm a Nazi now. I am not.
She can maybe visit
I'm
my
really
kids.
stuck right now on my next election cycle because here's the thing. Okay, thanks a lot, Ashley. I am. So I didn't used to like. So I didn't love. I never liked Trudeau particularly, but just because I didn't think he was particularly smart, and I have a lot of friends in common with him, so I knew he wasn't particularly smart. But I didn't like loathe him. And then I saw what he did with the what is it, the military act? I forget what the act is called, but specifically he froze people's bank accounts.
Oh wow, yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, even people
For the truckers?
Yeah, for the truckers. Even people like in other
Nazi.
countries were like, gee, like that's like invoking that is like, man, that was like pretty awful. And that made me like fearful. That actually
Good
made
oxygen.
me.
The air quality is real bad. You know?
And even like, and even calling people the things that he called them, just like for like, I just watched that and I was just astounded by somebody who is prime minister doing that. It was just, to me, that was crazy.
So final thoughts, I guess we went a little over, but we'll wrap up here. I guess my point is, you know, the fact that you're willing to come here, the fact that you agree on some of these issues means you're right wing.
Yeah, I'm a Nazi. Okay.
They'll say something like
Take that clip.
you're a fake liberal and they'll insult you for it and stuff like that. But we'll wrap it up there. I never really like we're getting into the swing of this show where we're going to be building a new set. We're going to be setting up new cameras and you know because right now this table is designed for like a multi-person conversation, not like a one-on-one kind of thing. But those things are coming.
There's
so
3 of us, Tim. Jeez.
yeah, but like We're gonna have probably like a half moon table or something,
Okay.
and we're like
That'd be cool,
design like a different set
Or round,
specifically
yeah.
for. This is a table that fits 6 people. You know what I mean?
I love how he ended the conversation on "you're nuts," and you're a right winger.
Well, because you oppose Trudeau.
Yeah.
And no, I do think it's awesome that you came out here and had the conversation,
Nice.
despite.
Yeah, but you are very different from, say, the typical Twitter leftist or whatever.
I am, but it also took me. I will say, like, it took me a little time to get there. I used to never talk to anybody on the right. I'll be honest there.
It's a cult.
Yeah, it wasn't intentional. I was just isolated, right? And it was like it took a bit of an intention to get to the point.
That's what abusive cults do. They isolate you.
A study that I like to cite shows that moderates consume 2/3 liberal sources, 1/3 conservative sources. Conservatives consume 2/3 conservative sources, 1/3 liberal sources, and liberals consume 98% liberal sources. So you quite literally have moderates and conservatives having the real conversation and liberals in a bubble. But we'll wrap it up there. It's been a blast. Thank you guys for hanging out and having the conversation. I think it was very fun.
I'm gonna hit
Thanks
more
for
of this
having-
oxygen.
I did give both Catherine and
This is
Ashley
awesome.
oxygen.
You guys should get this.
Yeah.
What is it? Boost oxygen.
Boost oxygen.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a doctor, so I just got it. I saw an ad.
And I swear I didn't bring the smoke here, even though I got blamed for it.
Canadians.
But man,
You guys got to get your fires in order,
We need
man.
to
Why am I
ban
bringing this in?
Canada instead of my New York City
We got to build
wood-fired
a
pizza.
200-foot big, beautiful wall from sea to shining sea to block out the smoke that's coming from Canada.
Yeah.
Anyway, you guys want to shout anything out before we wrap up?
sure, I'll shout out my Twitter handle is Mysterious Cat with a KAT, and I also have a Substack where I criticize both sides of the aisle and also talk about random things like imaginary friends that I don't have, and my Substack. I guess the easiest way to find it is Katherine Writes, KATHERINE Writes. I think you can spell that .com. And those are the best ways to find me. And I appreciate you having me with this. I guess I'm a Nazi
box?
now, officially.
Thanks for hanging
Please
out.
don't clip that.
Now someone's going to.
Oh, God.
There's a couple in there. I hope they clip it. You can follow me on Twitter at St. Clair Ashley, and you can buy my book, Elephants Are Not Birds. And as always, check out thebabylonbee.com.
All right, everybody. Thanks for hanging out. Become a member at timcast.com. We have a really awesome episode coming up next Friday in the Culture War. 2 guests. We're slowly building up the show, so I want to make sure that when we're booking people, we get clearance for promotion so that Monday we can promote Friday, the big event in the morning. We're going to be having these 2 individuals because I'm so excited for next week. I'm not going to say anything just yet, but you'll love it. It'll be a whole lot of fun. And I'll leave it there. Thanks for hanging out, and we will see you all tonight at Timcast IRL, 8 p.m.